Hey there, tonight we're diving into what Christmas was like in a medieval castle, where feasting like kings meant surviving the perilous joy of a boar's head on the table. And the truth is, the jesters told jokes sharper than your average knight's sword. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In the depths of a medieval winter, while the weather outside was doing its best impression of a Game of Thrones episode, the inside of a castle was anything but quiet. Instead, it was a whirlwind of chaos and clanging like Black Friday in a kitchen, except with more axes. As Christmas approached, the entire household was swept into a frenzy of preparations, all without the luxury of a single spreadsheet or a handy Excel formula to sum up the madness. It all started with the food, and boy, did they know how to eat. Forget your modern-day turkey and stuffing. We're talking about a culinary lineup that could rival an all-you-can-eat buffet. This wasn't just a feast, it was a logistical miracle. Picture this. A typical castle might house hundreds, including the lord's family, knights, servants, and guests, who, let's be honest, probably showed up just for the free food. Feeding this mini-army required staggering quantities of ingredients. We're talking upwards of 30 oxen, hundreds of sheep, and enough poultry to make Colonel Sanders blush. Baking was its own Herculean task. Medieval bakers didn't have the luxury of fancy gadgets or prepackaged yeast. Nope, they relied on wild yeast, which is a bit like trying to train a feral cat. Bread was a staple, with varieties like manchet, made from fine white flour, reserved for the upper crust, pun absolutely intended. Meanwhile, servants gnawed on coarser loaves that were about as appetizing as a brick. The brewing process was another cornerstone of preparation. Ale wasn't just a drink, it was the medieval equivalent of a hydration station. Water wasn't always safe to drink, so ale, with its relatively low alcohol content, was a daily necessity. During Christmas, however, they cranked things up a notch, brewing stronger concoctions that could make the most stoic knight dance like nobody was watching. A typical castle might brew barrels holding thousands of gallons, enough to ensure that everyone stayed merry, and perhaps a bit blurry-eyed. And let's not forget about the butchering. This was no time for vegetarians, folks. The castle's livestock faced a grim fate as each animal was prepared for the feast. It's hard to romanticize the reality of a medieval slaughterhouse, where the air was thick with the aroma of blood and fresh meat. But if you're hosting a Christmas shindig for an entire castle, you've got to break a few eggs, or in this case, butcher a few cows. What's truly astounding is how this entire operation ran like clockwork, all without a single digital reminder or a Google Calendar alert. Medieval kitchens were vast operations, staffed with more roles than a Shakespearean play. There was the head cook, of course, and a small army of scullions and spit boys. And if you think Gordon Ramsay runs a tight ship, you should meet a medieval head cook who could probably terrify a dragon into behaving. Medieval grocery lists were something to behold. They might include 10,000 eggs, a ton of flour, and enough spices to make any modern foodie gasp. Spices were a big deal, not just for flavoring food, but as a status symbol. Pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were the Bitcoin of the Middle Ages. Expensive, sought after, and sometimes hard to verify as authentic. Now, let's debunk a myth or two, shall we? The romantic image of knights and ladies dining in perfect harmony is, well, a bit of a fairy tale. The reality was far more chaotic. The great hall where these feasts were held was a cacophony of noise. Think medieval rock concert, complete with shouting, singing, and the occasional brawl. Table manners were a suggestion rather than a rule, and it wasn't uncommon for bones and scraps to be tossed to the floor for the dogs. So why did all this matter? Well, beyond the obvious need to keep everyone fed and in good spirits, these Christmas feasts were a display of wealth and power. A lord's ability to host a grand event signified his status and influence. In a society where social standing was everything, a successful Christmas celebration was like posting the perfect Instagram story. It was seen, noted, and envied. In these preparations, we see the medieval world in microcosm. a society deeply hierarchical, fiercely traditional, yet wonderfully inventive when it came to food. As they decked the halls with boughs of holly, or whatever greenery was on hand, the castle prepared not just for a feast, but for an event that reaffirmed the social bonds and power dynamics of the time. And as the lord and his guests toasted to the holiday, they were also toasting to their place in a world that, while harsh and unforgiving, was also rich with tradition and community. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the world of medieval Christmas, peeling back the layers of history with the precision of a master carver who knew decking the halls could be so, well, medieval. And speaking of decking those medieval halls, let's dive into the world of medieval Christmas decorations and entertainment, where creativity was the star of the show, not a department store credit card. You see, back in the day, they didn't have the luxury of mass-produced tinsel or a Hobby Lobby aisle dedicated to seasonal cheer. Instead, they relied on what nature and their imaginations had to offer. Forget the idea of merry halls festooned with a never-ending supply of holly and mistletoe. In reality, it was more like an enthusiastic attempt at a Pinterest project with Mother Nature's limited winter palette. Holly, ivy, and other evergreen plants were popular because, well, not much else was green in the dead of winter. These plants symbolized eternal life and resilience, which were pretty motivational themes for folks living in a time when a bad case of the sniffles could mean curtains. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic notion of grand, lavishly decorated halls. The truth was that medieval castles were drafty, damp, and about as cozy as a stone refrigerator. The decorations were more about function than fashion. Evergreens helped to mask the less-than-pleasant aromas that pervaded castle life, and those lovely scents of pine and fresh greenery. They were a welcome change from the usual fragrance of wet dog and smoke. Now, when it came to entertainment, a medieval castle during Christmas was a bit like a talent show on a caffeine high. Forget your televised talent competitions. These folks had their own version of America's Got Talent, minus the buzzers and Simon Cowell's judgmental eyebrow. Entertainers of all stripes flocked to the castles, eager to showcase their acts and earn a place at the table. Literally, since being a part of the festivities meant you also got fed. Minstrels were the rock stars of their day, traveling from place to place, strumming their lutes, singing tales of heroic knights and tragic love stories. These musical storytellers were the medieval equivalent of Spotify, providing an oral backdrop to the festivities. If you were a knight who had recently completed a particularly impressive quest, or just wanted to make one up, these were the guys you wanted around to sing your praises. Then there were the jesters, the original stand-up comedians, who would have fit right in on a medieval open mic night. These court jesters, with their colorful attire and quick wit, were tasked with keeping spirits high and laughter abundant. But being a jester wasn't all fun and games. They had to tread a fine line between making the Lord laugh and offending him. A poorly timed joke could result in an unplanned career change, likely involving a one-way trip to the gallows. And let's not forget the acrobats and dancers, who brought a touch of Cirque du Soleil to the medieval scene. With their gravity-defying stunts and elaborate routines, they dazzled audiences and added a visual flair that was otherwise lacking in the grayscale of medieval life. These performers were like the special effects team of the day, adding pizzazz and spectacle to the celebration. The entertainment wasn't just for pleasure, though. It served a crucial social function, reinforcing the hierarchy and the bonds of loyalty that held the feudal system together. The Lord's ability to host a grand celebration, complete with top-notch entertainment, was a testament to his power and influence. It was a status symbol as potent as any castle or suit of armor, and it was observed and noted by all, especially those who might fancy themselves as potential rivals. While the guests were entertained, they were also reminded of their place in the social order. The Great Hall wasn't just a venue. It was a stage where the drama of medieval life played out in full view. The seating arrangements were a social calculus, reflecting the hierarchy and alliances within the castle's walls. Where you sat could speak volumes about your standing and influence, much like the modern-day office Christmas party seating chart. So there you have it, a medieval Christmas in full swing, where the decorations were as much about masking the smell of wet wolfhound as they were about pleasing the eye, and the entertainment was a strategic mix of fun and fealty. As we look back on these festive halls, both the myth and the reality offer a fascinating glimpse into a world where history was made, one jest and one Harley bow at a time. But hold tight, we're not done yet. There's still more to uncover about the fascinating world of medieval Christmas. Next up, we'll delve into the customs and traditions that might make you grateful for your modern eggnog and ugly sweaters. Stay tuned as we continue to unwrap the layers of history, one festive anecdote at a time. As we wade deeper into the medieval Christmas revelry, it's time to lift the curtain on the grand theater of politics and social dynamics that lit up these festive gatherings like the original reality TV. Yes, the Great Hall was more than just a medieval party zone. It was a chessboard where the pieces were very much alive and had a penchant for ale. Forget about cozy holiday get-togethers. This was diplomacy with a side of drumsticks and deception. Picture the lord of the castle, perched at the head of a massive table that seemed to run on forever, his position as commanding as the throne itself. This wasn't just about having the best view of the jester's antics or first dibs on the roasted boar. Oh no, it was a living, breathing map of alliances and enmities, each seat a telltale sign of who was in, who was out, and who was perpetually on the fence. The closer you sat to the lord, the more favor you held, like a medieval version of sitting next to the CEO at the company lunch. But woe to the guest who found themselves exiled to the far end, where the drafts were as chilly as their standing in court. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of these seating arrangements. Imagine the power plays as the Lord's steward plotted out the dinner guests' positions like a political strategist on Red Bull. Each decision was a calculated move, a nod to honor here, a subtle snub there. The stakes were high, and a misplaced goblet or a clumsy elbow could ignite tensions simmering just beneath the surface, a medieval reminder that even the best-laid plans can be undone by spilled wine. And speaking of wine, let's not forget its role in this high-stakes theater. A cup of spiced wine could be a bribe, a peace offering, or even a challenge. In a world where treaties were as fragile as the goblets they toasted with, the wrong toast at the wrong time could spark a feud that would make the Hatfields and McCoys look like BFFs. After all, in an era where personal slights often led to personal wars, diplomacy wasn't just an art, it was a survival skill. One can't dismiss the economic undercurrents swirling beneath these gilded festivities. Hosting a Christmas feast in a medieval castle was about as cheap as a modern royal wedding. We're talking vast sums spent on food, drink, and entertainment, all to ensure that the lord's status remained as unassailable as the castle's stone walls. A single event could cost in the realm of £100, a fortune that could buy several villages or a small army of mercenaries, give or take a few dozen crossbows. The feast was also a chance to showcase the lord's wealth in the form of those elusive spices and imported wines. It was a display of power that said, "Look at my peppercorns and weep," a not-so-subtle reminder of the trade connections and resources at his disposal. In a society where the ability to import exotic goods was akin to owning a fleet of private jets, it was a flex that could be seen from miles away, literally, as the scent of cinnamon and cloves wafted through the castle halls. For the guests, these gatherings were a rare chance to rub elbows with the elite, to whisper in the right ears, and hopefully to cement alliances that could prove useful when the next bout of political turbulence hit. It was a Game of Thrones played out in real time, with real stakes and real consequences. Alliances formed over a shared love of venison pie or a mutual distaste for boiled cabbage could tip the scales in future power struggles, a reminder that the personal was always political and the political was always personal. But let's not romanticize the scene too much. Beneath the veneer of merriment and camaraderie lay a gritty, often brutal reality. The Great Hall, with its roaring fires and resplendent tapestries, was also a place where whispers of betrayal and plots of intrigue mingled with the scent of roast beef. It was a world where a misplaced word could lead to a midnight ride to the gallows, where trust was a rare commodity, and where loyalty was often a mask for ambition. So, while the guests laughed and danced, drank and dined, they were always mindful of the unspoken rules that governed their world. Those who navigated these treacherous waters successfully could rise to dizzying heights, while those who faltered could find themselves cast down into obscurity, or worse. It was a delicate dance of power and politics, one that demanded both grace and cunning, a reminder that in the medieval world, as in our own, the game was never truly over. As we continue to peel back the layers of this historical onion, remember, these gatherings were more than just festivities. They were microcosms of a world in flux, where every gesture, every word, and every goblet of wine could alter the course of history. So next time you sit down to your holiday meal, spare a thought for those medieval lords and ladies who did the same, albeit with a bit more at stake than a holiday hangover. And speaking of high stakes, stay tuned, because there's more to uncover as we dig deeper into the customs and traditions that made a medieval Christmas truly unforgettable. But let's shift our gaze from the gleaming goblets and intrigue-laden seating arrangements to the heart of the medieval Christmas spirit, charity. Or at least, what passed for charity in the Middle Ages. Because if you thought medieval Christmas was all about warm, fuzzy generosity, then prepare to have that snow globe shattered. The idea of charity back then was more about reinforcing social hierarchies than dismantling them. Sorry, Dickens, but Ebenezer Scrooge would have fit right in. Let's dive into the reality behind the myth of medieval benevolence, where the giving season was less about sharing goodwill and more about maintaining power structures. You see, the lords weren't just being charitable when they handed out alms or hosted grand feasts. They were making investments in loyalty. Think of it as medieval networking with a side of roasted pheasant. Take, for example, the tradition of the lord's largesse, where the ruling lord would distribute coins to the peasants and household staff. Sounds generous, right? But hold your jingle bells. This was less about spreading joy and more about securing the social order. By doling out a few coins, lords were essentially saying, remember who feeds you, ensuring their subjects remembered their place in the pecking order. It was a one-time annual bonus, but don't expect any health benefits or a retirement plan. The church, that bastion of medieval morality, was also in on the act. It championed the notion that charity was a path to salvation. Yet the church's charity often came with strings attached. Donating to the church could buy you a little extra grace in the afterlife, a sort of spiritual insurance policy, and who wouldn't want to make sure their eternal accommodations were upgraded from the economy to the celestial suite? The church was more than happy to oblige, but not without a healthy dose of self-interest. Your donation helped fund the construction of grand cathedrals, a visible testament to the church's power and influence. And let's be real, the clergy lived pretty comfortably themselves, with enough wine and incense to make any medieval monk's life feel like a perpetual festival. Then there were the almshouses, medieval shelters for the poor, which sound like a beacon of hope until you realize they were more like a medieval PR campaign. They served to ease the conscience of the wealthy, providing just enough support to keep the impoverished from becoming too unruly. The almshouses were often funded by wealthy patrons who wanted to be remembered for their piety rather than their purse strings, not entirely unlike those who slap their names on university buildings today. Charity, therefore, was a way to keep the social machine well-oiled, ensuring the peasants had just enough to survive, and the powerful could sleep easy at night, knowing they'd done their part to maintain the cosmic order. It was a system that kept the hierarchical status quo firmly in place, ensuring that the serfs remained, well, serfs, and the lords could continue feasting without a care in the world. And here's where things get even merrier. The concept of the 12 days of Christmas wasn't just a catchy carol, but a practical schedule of revelry and redistribution. The 12 days were filled with feasting and festivities, a structured timeline for lords to display their magnanimity, while the lower classes enjoyed the briefest respite from their eternal toil. During this time, the lord of the manor might invite his tenants to the great hall to partake in the leftovers of the Christmas feast, a gesture that, while seemingly generous, was more about showcasing the lord's wealth and power than genuine kindness. But before you think, the peasants were simply pawns in this feudal game. Remember that these festivities were also their chance to take a mini vacation from their back-breaking labor. They seized the opportunity to celebrate, enjoying food and drink they couldn't typically afford, while briefly forgetting the drudgery of their everyday existence. It was a time to connect with the community, to sing and dance, to partake in age-old traditions that gave their lives meaning beyond the plow and sickle. So, what does all this tell us? That Christmas in a medieval castle was a complex tapestry of tradition and power, where every act of generosity came with a side of political maneuvering. The holiday spirit was alive and well, but it was also pragmatic, serving to reinforce the very structures that governed medieval life. It was a world where the gifts given were as symbolic as they were substantial, where charity was a tool used to maintain the delicate balance of power and social order. As we wrap up this festive foray into medieval charity, remember that the Yuletide season was as much about shoring up alliances and displaying wealth as it was about sharing goodwill. So next time you're sipping eggnog by the fire, spare a thought for those medieval revelers whose Christmas celebrations were as layered and nuanced as the history from which they sprang. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the intricate web of medieval Christmas, where the next chapter promises even more insights into a world that was as fascinating as it was feudal. In wrapping up our journey through the medieval Yuletide, let's take a stroll down the cobblestone path of history to see just how much of that era's Christmas spirit has seeped into our modern festivities. Spoiler alert, more than you might think. If you've ever decked your halls with boughs of holly, sent a Christmas card, or overindulged in holiday feasting until you resembled a stuffed turkey, then you're already nodding to your medieval ancestors. Let's begin with those aforementioned boughs of holly. Long before Christmas trees became the festive focal point of every living room from New York to New Delhi, medieval folks were greening their halls with holly, ivy, and mistletoe. These evergreens symbolized life, persisting through the bleakest of winters, a tradition that stuck around, even as our winters have been softened by central heating. Today, when you hang that sprig of mistletoe, remember you're nodding to a practice that once involved more than just a cheeky kiss. It was about warding off evil spirits and ensuring a good harvest. Talk about a multitasking plant. And while we're on the subject of decorations, let's not forget the Yule log. In the medieval world, lighting a massive log and keeping it burning for 12 days was a way to mark the longest nights of the year with warmth and light, a flickering line of defense against the encroaching dark. Today, we've downsized that tradition into the form of a cake, which is much less of a fire hazard and significantly tastier. But the spirit of coming together around a shared source of warmth and light remains. Now, moving on from foliage and flames, let's tackle the feast. If you've ever found yourself in a post-dinner food coma, you'll appreciate the medieval tradition of going all out on the Christmas spread. Our modern holiday meals may not feature 30 oxen and a battalion of poultry, but the spirit of abundance is alive and well. Those medieval Christmas feasts were the original all-you-can-eat buffets, where the sheer scale of food wasn't just about indulgence, but a display of wealth and hospitality. Today, we might scale back the number of courses, but the idea of gathering everyone around a table to share in culinary delights remains a cornerstone of the holiday season. And speaking of gathering, let's not overlook the social aspect of these medieval celebrations. The Great Hall was where alliances were forged and social bonds strengthened over cups of spiced ale. In a modern twist, our Christmas parties and family gatherings serve a similar purpose, minus the political intrigue. Whether it's awkward office parties or heartwarming family reunions, the goal remains to connect, celebrate, and occasionally avoid stepping on conversational landmines. Of course, not all medieval customs have come through unscathed. Consider the tradition of warsailing, which has largely morphed into caroling. Originally, warsailing was about moving from house to house, singing loudly enough to ward off evil spirits while begging for drink. Now, it's more about singing jingle bells, off-key on your neighbor's doorstep, in exchange for a polite nod, or, if you're lucky, a hot cocoa. The medieval spirit of community and good cheer, however, is one tradition that's thankfully stood the test of time. One of the most significant, yet understated, legacies of medieval Christmas is the focus on charity and goodwill. While the medieval version might have been more about maintaining the social status quo, the idea of giving during the holidays has evolved into a more genuine expression of kindness. Whether it's donating to a favorite charity or volunteering at a local shelter, the holiday season remains a time when many of us feel a little more inclined to help those in need, a notion that echoes the medieval lord's largesse, albeit with hopefully less self-interest. Now, let's not forget the role of the church, which was as central to medieval Christmas as it is to many holiday celebrations today. Midnight, Mass, and the Nativity play continue to draw people together, echoing a time when religion was deeply intertwined with every aspect of life. The church offered not just spiritual guidance, but a community anchor, a place where the faithful could gather, reflect, and celebrate the deeper meaning of the season. As we navigate through the echoes of medieval Christmas in our modern lives, it's clear that while the trappings and circumstances may have changed, the core of what makes this holiday special remains remarkably intact. The themes of community, generosity, and celebration continue to resonate, reminding us that despite the centuries that separate us from our medieval forebears, the human desire to connect, celebrate, and hope for better days is timeless. So, as you hang your ornaments and prepare your holiday spread, take a moment to consider the rich tapestry of history woven into each tradition. From the flicker of a Yule log to the clink of glasses raised in cheer, these customs are more than just festive rituals. They're a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity, a reminder that no matter how much, or how little, has changed, the heart of Christmas beats as strongly now as it did in those drafty halls of stone. And with that, may your holiday season be as merry and bright as a medieval feast, sans the drafty stone walls, of course. The Sengoku period of Japan was like one long, drawn-out episode of Game of Thrones, but with even more swords and less CGI dragons. You're standing amid the chaos of the 15th and 16th centuries, a time when Japan was more fractured than a teenager's heart after their first breakup. This era was anything but peaceful. It was a time of relentless warfare, social upheaval, and enough political backstabbing to make Machiavelli blush. Now, let's talk about you, our samurai friend trying to make it in this madhouse. You're not just some armored knight in shining armor, riding gallantly into battle. Oh no, you're a survivor, which means your life is a balancing act on a katana's edge. Sure, you've got the daisho, the iconic pair of swords, but being a samurai is about way more than looking cool while wielding a katana. You've got to keep up with the Joneses, or the Tokugawas, and that means managing your finances as shrewdly as a medieval accountant. First off, the armor. You're not just grabbing a suit off the rack at your local samurai shop. Crafting a suit of armor was a costly affair. A custom set could run you the equivalent of a small fortune. We're talking about 250 ryo, which, adjusted for inflation, is like buying a luxury car today, and that's before you accessorize. This armor isn't just for show, it's your lifeline in a battlefield where arrows and spears rain down like monsoon season, and don't even get me started on the horse. In the Sengoku period, a samurai without a horse was like a rock star without a guitar, just not happening. The upkeep of these noble beasts was no small task. You needed to feed it, groom it, and train it, which could cost as much as maintaining a battalion of foot soldiers. A good horse was your status symbol, your trusty steed, and your ticket to mobility in the theater of war. Speaking of war, here's where the romanticized image of the samurai as noble warriors starts to unravel. Sure, there were those who fought for honor and their lords, but let's be honest, a lot of these guys were more like mercenaries with a better wardrobe. A time when loyalty was as reliable as a waxwork candle in a bonfire, samurai often fought for whoever could pay the highest ryo. Pragmatism trumped idealism because, at the end of the day, those fancy kimonos and armor sets weren't going to pay for themselves. The economic burden of maintaining this lifestyle was immense, and the constant warfare made the samurai profession both lucrative and precarious. On the one hand, war meant opportunities for loot, plunder, and glory. On the other, it meant risking your neck, and possibly losing it, every time you stepped onto the battlefield. It was a high-stakes game, and not everyone walked away with a winning hand. But let's not completely dismiss the myth here. The idea of the noble samurai fighting for justice and honor is as appealing as a bedtime story, but it's important to remember that real history is messier than a teenager's room. These warriors were often caught between their ideals and the harsh realities of their time. They had to navigate the treacherous political landscape, which was less about honor and more about survival. As you navigate this turbulent era, you're not just a warrior, you're a strategist, a diplomat, and sometimes a reluctant mercenary. The Sengoku period demands all these roles and more. It's a time when alliances shift faster than the tides, and trust is a rare commodity. So, keep your wits about you, and remember, in this world, the sharpest sword is often no match for the sharpest mind. Welcome to the Sengoku period, It's going to be one heck of a ride. So, you've strapped on your armor and saddled up your horse, ready to tackle the Sengoku period's political maze, where alliances lasted about as long as your average Hollywood power couple. Welcome to the era where loyalty was traded like baseball cards, and the only constant was change. Imagine being a samurai in this chaotic time. Your life was less about honor and more about playing a high-stakes game of risk, with the added bonus of actual risk. The Sengoku period was basically a nationwide game of musical chairs with swords. Why? Because Japan was carved into pieces by the daimyo, warlords who were as trigger-happy with alliances as they were with their swords. These guys ruled their domains like independent kingdoms, each with their own set of rules and ambitions. Picture this. You're a samurai, and your daimyo just decided to ally with the clan next door. Congrats! You're now pals with yesterday's enemies, but don't get too comfy. It could all change by next week. Let's talk about those daimyo for a sec. These were the folks running the show, and they were always on the lookout for more power, more land, and more samurai like you to bolster their armies. The daimyo weren't exactly the picture of stability. They switched sides faster than a politician on election day, which means you, dear samurai, had to be as nimble as a ninja in a room full of laser beams. One day you're pledging your undying loyalty to one lord, and the next, you're changing banners and pretending you've been a lifelong supporter of the new guy all along. Now, speaking of new guys, let's dive into the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, a real turning point if there ever was one. This battle was the ultimate showdown, like the Super Bowl of samurai warfare, except with more blood and fewer commercial breaks. It was here that Tokugawa Ieyasu, a man who knew a thing or two about playing the long game, managed to outmaneuver his rivals and set the stage for the Tokugawa shogunate, which would rule Japan for over 250 years. Talk about playing the long game, right? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Battle of Sekigahara didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the culmination of years of shifting alliances and backdoor deals, with daimyo switching sides faster than you can say betrayal. For a samurai, this was a make-or-break moment. Choose the right side, and you could find yourself in a cushy new position under the new regime. Pick the wrong team, and you might end up as a cautionary tale for future generations. It was a real-life version of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but with actual lives on the line. And here's the kicker. Even in this mess, the myth of the samurai as noble warriors persisted. Sure, many samurai fought with honor, but let's not sugarcoat it. Survival often meant putting honor on the back burner. Your daimyo might ask you to do things that would make your ancestors roll in their graves. But hey, you've got a family to feed and armor to maintain, so you do what you've got to do. In the heat of battle, loyalty was a luxury few could afford. Samurai were pragmatic, adapting to whichever way the wind blew. If that meant bowing to a new lord, so be it. This wasn't just about staying alive. It was about thriving in a dog-eat-dog world. You had to be as sharp as your katana, ready to roll with the punches and strike when the time was right. But don't just take my word for it. Let's look at some numbers. At Sekigahara, there were approximately 160,000 warriors, a staggering figure that highlights just how epic this clash was. Tokugawa Ieyasu's forces numbered around 88,000, while his opponent, Ishida Mitsunari, had about 72,000 troops. This wasn't just a battle. It was a seismic shift in the balance of power, one that would reshape Japan for centuries to come. For the samurai involved, this was their shot at glory or oblivion. Victory could mean lands, titles, and a secure future. Defeat, on the other hand, could mean losing everything, including your head. The stakes were as high as Mount Fuji, and everyone knew it. You had to be not just a warrior, but a gambler, betting it all on the outcome of this monumental clash. And what about those shifting loyalties? During the battle, some clans actually switched sides mid-fight. That's right, they pulled a 180 at the last minute, which is like changing teams during the halftime show. The most famous of these flip-floppers was the Kobayakawa clan, who turned against Mitsunari and helped secure Tokugawa's victory. Their sudden switch was a decisive blow, tipping the scales in Ieyasu's favor and earning them a place in the annals of history as the ultimate fair-weather friends. So what's the takeaway here? In the Sengoku period, being a samurai wasn't just about swinging a sword. It was about navigating a minefield of alliances and treachery. You had to be as adaptable as a chameleon in a crayon factory, ready to change colors at a moment's notice. Sure, the romantic image of the samurai as paragons of virtue is appealing, but the reality was far more complex. It was a world where survival often meant making tough choices, where the line between honor and pragmatism was as thin as a katana's edge. And we're just getting started. There's more to this tale of intrigue and warfare, so stay tuned as we keep unraveling the tapestry of the Sengoku period. The story is far from over, and there are still plenty of battles to be fought, alliances to be tested, and legends to be made. Keep your sword sharp and your wits sharper. There's a lot more history to come. All right, samurai, let's sheath that sword for a moment and step off the battlefield. Because believe it or not, even the fiercest warriors need a break from the action. The Sengoku period wasn't just a never-ending montage of epic battles. There was a whole lot of life happening in between the skirmishes. You see, the samurai weren't just war machines. They were real people with real lives. This is where things get interesting. First up, let's tackle the Bushido Code. You know, that romanticized set of rules often portrayed as the ultimate guide for samurai living. The truth, it was more like guidelines than actual rules. Think of it as the pirate code in Pirates of the Caribbean. Sure, it sounds impressive, but in reality, it was more about flexibility than rigidity. The Bushido Code emphasized virtues like loyalty, honor, and bravery, but it wasn't set in stone until the Edo period, long after the Sengoku fireworks had fizzled out. Samurai during the Sengoku era were more concerned with surviving the chaos than adhering strictly to a code of conduct that was still in its formative years. Now, when the swords were sheathed and the dust settled, what did these warriors do in peacetime? Many samurai turned their talents to administration and governance. You didn't just hang up your armor and twiddle your thumbs. Oh no, you rolled up your sleeves and got to work on the paperwork. After all, someone had to manage the lands and ensure that rice taxes were collected. And let me tell you, rice was the Bitcoin of the Sengoku period. It was the currency that greased the wheels of society, and samurai often found themselves in the role of bureaucrat. They were the spreadsheets and calculators of their day, tasked with making sure everything added up. Speaking of rice, let's talk numbers. A koku, which was the amount of rice needed to feed one person for a year, was the standard measure of wealth. Daimyos measured their domains not in acres or hectares, but in koku. For example, a mid-level samurai might manage a stipend of 100 koku, while a powerful daimyo could command 1 million koku. That's a lot of sushi, folks. This economic system meant that even the fieriest warriors had to be part-time accountants, balancing the books to ensure their lord's coffers, and their own, were never empty. And here's another twist in the tale. Samurai were often landowners, managing estates and collecting taxes from peasants who worked the fields. But it wasn't all about sitting back and watching the rice roll in. Samurai had to navigate complex social hierarchies and local politics. Land disputes and peasant uprisings were real threats, and a savvy samurai had to be as adept at negotiating as they were at swordplay. It was a delicate dance of power and diplomacy, all while maintaining the veneer of honor and nobility. Let's not forget the ever-looming threat of demotion. Yep, a samurai's social status was about as stable as a house of cards. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and you could find yourself stripped of your rank and your land, left to wander the countryside as a ranin. The ranin, or masterless samurai, were like the freelancers of the Sengoku era. Some found new lords, others formed bands of mercenaries, and a few even turned to banditry. The road to redemption was rocky, but the potential for a comeback was always there. And speaking of redemption, let's address the myth of samurai discipline. Sure, they were disciplined, but not in the way Hollywood might lead you to believe. The image of a stoic warrior meditating under a waterfall, perfecting his sword technique, is more myth than reality. Samurai certainly trained hard, but they were also known to indulge in the pleasures of life. Sake was a staple, and feasts could be as extravagant as a Vegas buffet. It was a world where the pursuit of pleasure went hand in hand with the pursuit of honor. In fact, the arts were a major part of samurai life off the battlefield. Many samurai were patrons of the arts, supporting no theater, which was the Netflix of its day, offering both entertainment and a bit of moral instruction. And let's not forget poetry. Haiku and tenka were popular forms, allowing warriors to express their deepest thoughts and emotions. The juxtaposition of a warrior penning a delicate verse while also being capable of wielding a deadly katana is as fascinating as it is contradictory. It's a reminder that these were multifaceted individuals, not one-dimensional characters. But hold on. Before you start picturing the samurai as Renaissance men in armor, there's another layer to peel back. The reality of their day-to-day struggles was as gritty as it gets. Power, land, and status were constantly in flux, and samurai had to be eternally vigilant. Political intrigue was an ever-present undercurrent, and maintaining favor with one's lord could be a full-time job. Alliances were fragile, and loyalty was often a transaction rather than a virtue. It was a world where a sharp mind was as valuable as a sharp blade. So, what's the takeaway from this peek behind the curtain? The samurai were more than just warriors. They were complex, multifaceted individuals trying to navigate a tumultuous period in history. The myths and legends, while captivating, often gloss over the harsh realities and struggles that define their lives. From economic challenges and social dynamics to political maneuvering and personal ambitions, the life of a samurai was as intricate as a beautifully crafted katana. And guess what? We're just scratching the surface. There's still so much more to uncover about this fascinating era, so keep those swords sharp and your curiosity sharper. The Sengoku period is far from finished telling its story, and there are plenty more chapters to explore. So stay tuned, because the saga of the samurai isn't over yet. So, here's where it gets a little explosive, literally. Just when you thought the samurai were the ultimate warriors, wielding katanas with surgical precision, the Sengoku period threw a curveball that shook their world like a seismic jolt. Enter the Tenga-shima, the matchlock gun, a foreign import that landed in Japan like a plot twist no one saw coming. This wasn't just a new toy for the battlefield. It was a game-changer that forced the samurai to adapt or risk being left in the dust. Picture this. It's 1543, and a Chinese junk carrying Portuguese traders drifts onto the shores of Tenga-shima Island. These guys brought more than just tales of distant lands. They packed heat. The matchlock guns they carried were rudimentary compared to modern firearms, but they were revolutionary at the time. The Japanese, ever the astute observers, took one look at these weapons and thought, hey, we could use those. And just like that, the samurai's world was about to get a whole lot louder. Now, let's talk brass tacks, or rather, brass matchlocks. The cost of importing these weapons was no small change. A single matchlock gun could set you back around 1,000 man, roughly the price of several katanas. Initially, these guns were rare and expensive, more of a novelty than a strategic staple. But as local craftsmen mastered the art of gun making, production costs plummeted, and these firearms became more accessible. By the 1560, the price dropped to about 250 man per gun, making them affordable enough for daimyos to start stockpiling them like they were going out of style. The introduction of firearms didn't just change the battlefield. It transformed samurai tactics. The traditional image of two warriors squaring off in single combat was replaced by the cold efficiency of firearms. A skilled swordsman could spend years perfecting his technique, while a peasant armed with a matchlock could be trained to pull a trigger in a matter of days. This democratization of lethality meant that samurai had to rethink their approach to warfare. The battlefield became less about individual glory and more about strategic positioning and firepower. To give you a sense of scale, let's crunch some numbers. At the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, Oda Nobunaga deployed around 3,000 arquebusiers, another term for matchlock gunners, in disciplined ranks behind wooden palisades. This wasn't just a random tactical decision. It was a calculated move that changed the course of the battle. The result, a decisive victory over the Taikta clan's famed cavalry, proving that when it came to firepower, quality often trumped quantity. But let's not romanticize the gunpowder revolution too much. The matchlock was far from perfect. It was a cumbersome, flint-sparked contraption that required constant maintenance and a fair bit of luck to fire correctly. Rain and humidity could render it useless, which, in a country known for its rainy seasons, was a significant drawback. Still, the psychological impact of firearms was immense. The thunderous roar of a volley was enough to rattle even the most seasoned warriors. and the samurai had to adapt quickly to this new, noisy reality. So how did the samurai respond to this paradigm shift? Well, adaptability became the name of the game. Some embraced the new technology wholeheartedly, incorporating firearms into their arsenals and strategies. Others clung to tradition, viewing the matchlock as an affront to the samurai ethos of honor and skill. But ultimately, pragmatism won out. As the saying goes, adapt or die. And in the cutthroat world of Sengoku Japan, survival often meant embracing change, no matter how unsettling it might be. This technological evolution wasn't just about warfare. It had economic ripples too. The demand for firearms spurred a burgeoning industry, with gunsmiths popping up across the country like mushrooms after a storm. The Tengashima became a symbol of the new order, representing both the promise and the peril of technological progress. In a world where a single bullet could decide the fate of a battle, the samurai had to learn to balance tradition with innovation, finding harmony between the sword and the gun. And let's not forget the cultural impact. The samurai, once seen as the epitome of martial prowess, had to grapple with the idea that a common foot soldier armed with a matchlock could be just as deadly, if not more so. This shift challenged the very foundations of samurai identity and forced them to reconsider their place in a rapidly changing world. It was a time of soul-searching and reinvention, where the old ways clashed with the new in a battle for the heart of the samurai spirit. Yet, amidst all this change, the allure of the samurai mystique remained. Romanticized images of noble warriors continued to captivate the imagination, even as the realities of warfare evolved. The samurai were no longer just knights of old. They were becoming something new, something more complex and nuanced. They were warriors of a new age, caught in the crossfire of tradition and technology, striving to maintain their honor in a world that was constantly shifting beneath their feet. And this is just the beginning of their transformation. As we delve deeper into the saga of the Sengoku period, we'll explore how the samurai continued to evolve, adapting to new challenges and redefining what it meant to be a warrior in an era of upheaval. So, keep your matchlocks primed and your katanas sharp, because this tale of innovation and adaptation is far from over. The story of the samurai is one of resilience and reinvention, and there's plenty more to uncover in the chapters ahead. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. As the dust of the Sengoku period began to settle, you might imagine the samurai resting on their laurels, swords sheathed, contemplating their newfound peace. But let's set the record straight. The transition to the Tokugawa shogunate wasn't a gentle glide into serenity. It was more of a hard pivot, with samurai skidding into a world where their swords were suddenly more ceremonial than practical. Tokugawa Ieyasu, after his victory at Sekigahara in 1600, established a regime that was about as stable as a granite statue, and he wasn't shy about letting everyone know it. Now, we're talking about a peace that lasted over 250 years, the Edo period, turning the chaos of the Sengoku era into a distant memory. For samurai, this was like being told the rock concert was cancelled, and now they had to sit through an endless opera instead. This newfound peace meant that the warrior class faced a serious identity crisis. No more daily skirmishes or nightly plodding over sake. Instead, they had to navigate the mundane waters of bureaucracy, governance, and cultural pursuits. Let's break it down. The samurai, once the poster children for medieval Japan's cutthroat survival skills, suddenly found themselves in a society that valued peace over prowess. Their roles as warriors diminished, and they were now expected to become the administrators, the managers, the civil servants of New Japan. This was a bit like telling a rock star to become an accountant. Sure, they'll do it, but they might not love it. The Tokugawa shogunate, keen on maintaining order, set about restructuring the samurai class into a disciplined force of bureaucrats. So instead of practicing their swordplay, samurai were now tallying rice taxes and ensuring the smooth running of their domains. The transition was as jarring as finding your favorite band has gone acoustic. And speaking of rice, let's not forget the koku system. The samurai's stipend was measured in koku, with 1 koku being enough rice to feed a person for a year. This wasn't just a quirky metric. It was the economic backbone of the shogunate. A samurai's worth was literally bound up in his ability to manage rice, not just swing a sword. Imagine the culture shock. These warriors had to become part-time economists, balancing budgets instead of blades. For many, this shift was about as welcome as a katana to the gut. But here's the twist. While the samurai were adapting to these new roles, they were also busy idealizing their past. The warrior ethos, now a relic, became romanticized. Bushido, the way of the warrior, was codified into a strict moral code during the Edo period, turning what had been a flexible set of practices into a rigid doctrine. It's a bit like taking pirate folklore and turning it into a corporate manual. The samurai, with fewer battles to fight, began to see themselves as the guardians of a noble tradition, even as they wrestled with the realities of peacetime. The art and culture scene flourished during the Edo period. Call it the samurai's second act. With swords taking a backseat, many samurai turned their attention to the arts. They became patrons of theater, tea ceremonies, and calligraphy, as these pursuits were seen as extensions of the samurai spirit. This was a time when haiku and tanka poetry flourished, with samurai expressing their existential dilemmas in 17 syllables or less. It was as if the entire class had collectively joined a book club, swapping tales of yore for verses of introspection. But let's not sugarcoat it. Beneath this cultural renaissance, the samurai faced economic pressures. Peace was expensive, and many samurai found themselves struggling to maintain their status. Some took on side gigs, while others turned to teaching martial arts or managing local affairs. Once mighty warrior class was learning to hustle in a world that no longer needed their swords. It's a bit like the modern-day gig economy, but with kimonos and a lot more pressure to uphold family honor. As the Edo period progressed, the samurai continued to grapple with their changing roles. The rise of the merchant class further complicated matters, as wealth began to flow into the hands of those who traded rather than fought. Samurai, bound by rigid class structures, couldn't simply enter commerce, leaving many resentful of their diminishing power. The irony. In a society that supposedly revered the samurai spirit, it was the merchants who were quietly gaining influence, their coffers swelling as they capitalized on Japan's internal stability. Yet, through all this, the myth of the samurai endured. The romanticized image of the noble warrior, steeped in honor and tradition, continued to capture imaginations. From kabuki plays to woodblock prints, the samurai legend was perpetuated, becoming an integral part of Japan's cultural identity. Even as their real-world influence waned, the samurai spirit lived on in the nation's collective consciousness. This idealization was more than nostalgia. It was a form of cultural preservation, a way to honor the past while navigating the present. And here we are, centuries later, still fascinated by these warriors of law. Samurai have become cultural icons, their stories retold and reimagined in countless movies, books, and video games. From Kurosawa's masterpieces to modern anime, the samurai live on, their legends larger than life. The reality of their existence, fraught with economic hardship, political maneuvering, and existential angst, has become overshadowed by the myth. Yet this myth continues to resonate, a testament to the enduring allure of the samurai spirit. So, what's the final word on these legendary figures? The samurai were more than just warriors. They were complex individuals navigating a rapidly changing world. Their legacy is one of adaptation and reinvention, of finding new ways to uphold their ideals in a world that no longer needed their swords. The myths may gloss over the messy realities, but they also speak to a universal truth. The quest for honor, identity, and purpose is timeless. The samurai, with all their contradictions, exemplify this journey, reminding us that even in the face of change, the spirit of resilience endures. And there you have it, the saga of the samurai, a tale of glory and grit, myth and reality, honor and adaptation. It's a story that continues to captivate, a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts we uncover. So, whether you're a history buff or a casual listener, the samurai offer a fascinating glimpse into the complexities of human nature and the enduring power of myth. Every so often, a place like ancient Sumer pops up in history that makes you wonder if someone accidentally left their time machine on shuffle. Here we have a civilization around 4,500 BCE that was as advanced as it was mysterious, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now modern-day Iraq. Picture a landscape not just of dusty ruins, but of bustling cities like Uruk and areas that were essentially the Manhattan of Mesopotamia. This wasn't just about mud bricks and ziggurats, though let's be honest, those are architectural icons in their own right. Sumer was a powerhouse of technological innovation, complete with the earliest known riding system, cuneiform, and savvy in trade that would make today's Wall Street brokers raise an eyebrow. In this ancient hub of human ingenuity, women were doing a lot more than just keeping the fires burning and the children fed. Let's dive into the surprising social dynamics at play. Contrary to the stereotype of their ancient housewife, Sumerian women held roles that would make any modern resume shine. They were priestesses, businesswomen, and even legal experts, basically the Swiss Army knives of their time. The myth of women in ancient societies being confined to the kitchen is, quite frankly, a historical facepalm. Take the priestesses, for instance. These women were more than spiritual cheerleaders. They wielded serious influence. In temples like those dedicated to the goddess Inanna, priestesses were key players, managing temple estates and redistributing goods. Inanna herself was a goddess with a bit of an attitude, embodying love, war, and political power. Talk about a triple threat. Priestesses often came from elite families, ensuring that power was as much about lineage as it was about divine favor. The temple was not just a spiritual center, it was an economic powerhouse, owning land and employing laborers. A gig here was essentially ancient corporate ladder climbing. Then there were the businesswomen. Forget the idea of women only handling the domestic sphere. Sumerian ladies were out there signing contracts and managing enterprises. They engaged in trade, with some women even being recorded as owning businesses. Yes, you heard that right. Cuneiform tablets from cities like Lagash and Umma reveal women involved in the sale of wool, textiles, and grains. In a society where the economy was the beating heart, these women were the blood vessels keeping it all flowing. And let's not forget about the beer. Sumerians loved their brews, and women were often the brewmasters. They ran taverns, and were responsible for making sure the city didn't run dry. A noble task, indeed. Governance also saw the fairer sex stepping up. Women could participate in legal proceedings and own property, a right that many societies wouldn't grant for thousands of years. This wasn't just a token gesture. It was a testament to their integral role in society. In one legal document, a woman named Kugbao is even noted as a ruler of the city of Kish, showing that female leadership was not just a footnote in history, but a chapter in its own right. Of course, we can't discuss Sumer without talking economy. The land between two rivers wasn't just picturesque, it was fertile. Agriculture was the mainstay, with barley being the crop of choice. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of Bitcoin. Sumerian farmers harnessed the rivers with impressive irrigation systems, turning the region into a breadbasket long before the term was coined. This economic prosperity allowed for specialization of labor, meaning not everyone had to be a farmer. When your society produces a surplus of grain, you can afford to have people who write, brew, and trade, and yes, that included women. Now, let's debunk the myth of the ancient housewife. While it's tempting to romanticize the past, with visions of women confined to spinning yarn and raising ankle biters, while their husbands did the important stuff, Sumer tells a different story. Women were involved in nearly every aspect of public life, their roles as varied as the society itself. They were not just passive participants, but active contributors to the cultural and economic tapestry of their world. So, what's the takeaway here? Sumer was a civilization that thrived on complexity, and its women were pivotal to that success. They were not relegated to the sidelines, but were front and center, shaping their society in ways that were both expected and revolutionary. It's a reminder that history is full of surprises, and the more we dig, the more we realize that the past was anything but simple. So, the next time someone tries to tell you that women in ancient times were just sitting around weaving baskets, you can smile knowingly, armed with the truth of ancient Sumer. Now, let's shift gears from the bustling streets and entrepreneurial spirit of ancient Sumer to the stone-cold reality of their legal system. Enter the Code of Ur-Nammu, the OG of law codes, dating back to around 2100 BCE. This isn't just a dusty relic for legal historians to fawn over. It's a window into the societal values and gender dynamics of the time. Think of it as the ancient world's attempt at creating order out of chaos, long before lawyers made it a full-time gig. The Code of Unwrappe lays down the law with a certain flair, and by flair, I mean a mix of justice and eyebrow-raising penalties. This code is like the ancient version of your favorite legal drama, minus the catchy theme song. It lists various offenses and their corresponding punishments, but for now, let's zoom in on how it impacted women. Spoiler alert, it's a mixed bag. Women were recognized as legal entities, which is a big deal, considering some cultures weren't granting that courtesy until recently. They could own property, inherit from their parents, and even engage in contracts. It's like early feminism, Sumerian style. However, before we get too carried away with applause, let's delve deeper. The code wasn't exactly waving the feminist flag. Women had rights, sure, but they were often viewed through the lens of their relationship to men. For instance, if a married woman was found guilty of committing adultery, the punishment was death by drowning. Talk about a harsh verdict. Meanwhile, men got off with far less severe consequences for similar misdeeds. It's a bit like giving someone a life sentence for jaywalking, while others get a slap on the wrist for grand theft auto. Marriage contracts in Sumer were quite the legal spectacle. These weren't just romantic promises exchanged over candlelit dinners. They were detailed agreements outlining the rights and responsibilities of each party. If the marriage was the cake, then the contract was the icing that held it all together. Or, depending on your perspective, ironclad prenup that dictated everything from property division to the care of children. Sumerian women could bring property into a marriage, and crucially, they retained control over their dowries. This wasn't just a sweetener for the bride's family, it was economic security, ensuring she had financial leverage, something modern prenups still aim to provide. But let's not forget about divorce, that ancient tradition we still haven't perfected. In Sumer, if a marriage went sour, law had a few things to say. Women could initiate divorce, which is commendable for the time, but there was a catch. She had to prove sufficient cause. A bit like needing a hall pass from the universe to exit a bad relationship. If the husband was found at fault, the wife could return to her family with her dowry intact. However, if she was deemed the guilty party, well, let's just say her prospects weren't as rosy. It was all very tit-for-tat, with a side of patriarchal bias. In terms of property rights, Sumerian women had a surprising amount of clout. They could own, buy, and sell property independently, which was revolutionary. Picture this, a Sumerian woman signing a clay tablet contract for a piece of land, perhaps even more satisfying than swiping your credit card today. However, these rights were often contingent on their roles within the family unit. Women could inherit property, but typically only if there were no male heirs. It was a progressive system, but not without its limitations, a bit like giving someone a slice of cake, but holding back the frosting. Now, let's hit pause on romanticizing this ancient society. While Sumer had progressive elements, it was no egalitarian utopia. Women's rights, while notable, were primarily framed around their roles as daughters, wives, and mothers. The legal system, much like our own, was a reflection of its time, filled with complexities and contradictions. It recognized women's contributions, but often did so in a way that reinforced existing gender hierarchies. It's a lesson in history's dual nature. For every step forward, there's often a shuffle back. So what's the takeaway from Sumer's legal landscape? It's a testament to the intricate dance between power and protection, where women's rights were acknowledged, but not always equitably applied. It's a reminder that while history can surprise us with its progressiveness, it also reflects the biases and limitations of its era. As we continue to explore the fascinating world of ancient Sumer, keep in mind that the past is a tapestry of contradictions, woven together by the threads of human ambition and societal norms. So next time you hear someone pining for the good old days, you might want to remind them that those days were a lot more complicated and a lot less romantic than they might think. Now that we've gotten a taste of Sumerian law, brace yourself as we dive into the world where religion and reality often collided, the lives of women within the sacred spaces of ancient Sumer. If you thought the legalities were a mixed bag, wait till you get a load of this. Religion in Sumer wasn't just a Sunday morning kind of gig, it was the pulse of society. And women, well, they were right at the heart of it, performing roles that swung between empowerment and constraint with all the grace of a trapeze artist. Take Enheduanna, for starters. Enheduanna, a name that should be as iconic as Cleopatra, but often gets buried under the sands of time. She wasn't just a priestess. She was the Beyoncé of Sumerian religious life, the daughter of Sargon of Akkad. Yes, the Sargon who basically invented the concept of empire, and Enheduanna held the high priestess role of En, a position of immense religious and political clout. And here's the kicker. She was the first known author in history to sign her work. That's right, folks. Before Shakespeare, before Homer, there was Enheduanna, dropping hymns dedicated to the goddess Inanna like they were the ancient world's top 40 hits. Enheduanna's writings weren't just religious texts, they were political manifestos. Her hymns to Inanna didn't merely praise the goddess, they reinforced the divine right of her father's rule. Talk about a PR campaign with cosmic backing. Through her poetry and political savvy, she wielded influence that would make any modern spin doctor envious. But let's not sugarcoat it. While Enheduanna's role gave her a megaphone, it also came with its challenges. She was exiled at one point, only to return and reclaim her position, a testament to her resilience and the precarious nature of power. Now, before we get too misty-eyed about ancient female empowerment, let's zoom out to the everyday temple workers whose lives were less headline-grabbing but equally important. These women were the backbone of temple operations, handling everything from managing property to performing rituals. They played roles as Naditu, Vatari priestesses, or as part of the staff that kept the temples, those ziggurates that could rival any modern skyscraper, running like well-oiled machines. This wasn't just a religious duty, it was an economic one. Temples were major economic centers, and these women were crucial cogs in the machinery of Suma's bustling economy. But here's where the myth-busting comes in. Don't think of these goddesses as mere fairy tale figures floating on clouds, dispensing wisdom like a cosmic advice column. Sumerian goddesses like Inanna and Ninhursag were not just symbolic figures, they were integral to the very fabric of Sumerian life. Inanna, for instance, was a deity of love, war, and justice, a triple threat that makes her sound like a cross between Cupid, Athena, and a supreme court judge. Her influence was felt in every corner of society, dictating not just spiritual matters, but also impacting political and military decisions. The presence of such powerful goddesses reflects the duality of women's roles in Suma. On one hand, these deities seem to celebrate feminine power. On the other hand, they also reinforced societal norms. Inanna's notorious descent into the underworld, a tale of loss and rebirth, mirrored the societal expectation of women to navigate the tightrope between domesticity and public life. They were revered yet constrained, celebrated yet circumscribed, much like their mortal counterparts. The goddess Ninhursag, on the other hand, was associated with fertility and the earth, embodying the nurturing aspect of femininity. Her imagery was potent, especially in a society where agriculture was the economic backbone. Fertility wasn't just a metaphor, it was the very essence of prosperity. The temples dedicated to goddesses like Ninhursag served as reminders of the cyclical nature of life and the dependence on female vitality. But let's not kid ourselves. While these goddesses were revered, their worship also underscored women's roles in reproduction and nurturing, binding them to the roles of caregivers and life-givers in the societal narrative. In essence, religious roles offered women power, but it was a double-edged sword. The high priestesses could wield influence, but they were still subject to the whims of politics and patriarchal structures. Everyday temple workers had economic opportunities, but their roles were often confined to temple confines. It's a classic case of one step forward, one step back. So, what's the bigger picture here? Sumerian society was a complex tapestry, one where women had both spheres of influence and limitations. They were both the weavers and the subjects of the intricate patterns that defined their world. While the goddesses they worshipped were powerful, they also reflected the paradoxes of feminine existence. It's a reminder that history, much like life, is full of contradictions, at once empowering and limiting, progressive and regressive. As we wrap up this part of our journey through ancient Sumer, keep in mind that the story doesn't end here. There's more to uncover about the social dynamics and cultural intricacies of this fascinating civilization. So, hold on to your ziggurates, because we're not done exploring the highs and lows of Sumer's past just yet. Stay tuned for more insights into a world that was as groundbreaking as it was complex. as we move from the sacred sanctuaries of goddesses to the bustling marketplaces of Sumer. It's time to dive into the economic engine room, where women were not just cogs, but the engineers pulling the levers. We're talking about an ancient world where entrepreneurial spirit was alive and thriving long before anyone could spell entrepreneur. In ancient Sumer, women were the original side hustlers. Picture this: a Sumerian woman managing a household that doubles as a textile workshop. It wasn't just about weaving. It was about business acumen that would give today's startup founders a run for their Bitcoin. The household was the epicenter of small-scale industry, where every family member had a role. Housewives, more like house CEOs. Textiles were the bread and butter of Sumerian household industries, and women were the undisputed queens of this realm. Spinning yarn and weaving cloth might sound quaint, but the textile industry was a powerhouse, akin to the tech giants of today. Women produced vast quantities of woolen goods, from everyday garments to temple offerings. In the city of Lagash alone, records show women producing over 1,000 pieces of cloth annually. That's no small feat when you consider they were doing it all by hand, no industrial looms to be found here. The costs? Well, let's break it down. The price of wool in Sumer was about 1 shekel for a bundle, and it took several bundles to produce a single garment. A skilled weaver could complete about 2 garments a month. In today's terms, it's like turning a $10 investment into a $100 sale, not too shabby. Profit margins were slim, but in a barter economy, trading cloth for grain, oil, or even beer made it all worthwhile. And speaking of beer, let's raise a glass to the ancient brewmasters, many of whom were women. Beer wasn't just a beverage in Sumer. It was liquid gold. Women ran many of the city's taverns and breweries, managing not just production but distribution. These were the ancient equivalent of microbreweries, with women creating ales that were both a staple of the diet and a social lubricant. The cost of a pint, about 2 quarts of barley, which wasn't just affordable, it was practically a steal for the Sumerian worker looking to unwind after a long day of brickmaking or ziggurat building. But Sumerian women didn't just stop at household industries. Some set their sights on larger-scale trade, managing enterprises that stretched beyond the city walls. They were involved in the trade of goods like dates, fish, and even rare items like lapis lazuli, an ancient bling factor that made any jewelry piece pop. These women were savvy negotiators, using cuneiform tablets to record transactions and contracts. Think of them as the original blockchain, ensuring transparency and trust in their dealings. The profits from these ventures weren't just lining pockets. They were empowering women within their communities. With economic clout came social influence. Women could reinvest their earnings into their families, securing better futures for their children, or they could contribute to temples, earning them respect and recognition within both spiritual and civic circles. But before we get too carried away with the romance of the past, let's bust some myths. While women had significant economic roles, their ventures were often limited by the overarching patriarchal system. Ownership of large enterprises was typically reserved for the elite, and while women could engage in trade, their success was often contingent on male relatives or patrons. It's like having a glass ceiling, but with a ziggurat-shaped roof. Yet, even within these constraints, Sumerian women managed to carve out spaces of power and influence. They were the silent architects of their society's economy, their contributions as essential as the rivers that sustained their fields. And while the records may not always sing their praises, the evidence of their impact is etched into every cuneiform tablet and every piece of woven cloth that has survived the sands of time. So, what's the takeaway here? Sumerian women were the backbone of their society's economy, proving that you don't need a boardroom to be a boss. They juggled roles as mothers, businesswomen, and community leaders with a finesse that would make even the most seasoned multitasker envious. Their stories remind us that history is full of hidden figures, and sometimes the most influential players are the ones the records barely mention. As we continue our exploration of ancient Sumer, remember that these women weren't just surviving. They were thriving, shaping their world in ways that resonate even today. So, as we prepare to delve into the next chapter of this civilization, let's keep our eyes peeled for more surprises, because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past is never as simple or as static as it seems. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. Now that we've got a handle on the economic wizardry of Sumerian women, let's take a step back and ponder the bigger picture. You might be thinking, so what? Why sift through ancient clay tablets to unearth the life stories of women who lived over 500 years ago? Well, let's dive into the legacy of these remarkable women and how their contributions resonate far beyond the dusty ruins of Mesopotamia. First off, let's address the elephant in the room. How much has changed since the days when the Sumerians were busy inventing riding and brewing beer? Spoiler alert, quite a bit, yet not nearly enough. In many ways, Sumerian women were trailblazers, breaking the mold before it was even fully formed. They were involved in business, religion, and law, proving that leadership knows no gender. However, their roles were still tethered to a patriarchal framework, a constant tug-of-war that modern society is still grappling with. Fast forward to today, and women are CEOs, astronauts, and heads of state, but the echoes of Sumerian society can still be heard. Women today face similar challenges, juggling multiple roles while still fighting for equal pay and representation. It seems the more things change, the more they stay the same. The Sumerian legacy is a reminder that progress is a marathon, not a sprint. The path to equality is littered with both triumphs and setbacks, much like the zigzagging streets of ancient Ur. So, what can modern society learn from these ancient pioneers? For starters, the importance of recognizing and valuing all contributions, not just those that fit neatly into predefined boxes. The Sumerians didn't have the luxury of sidelining half their population. They tapped into the full spectrum of human capability, from the priestess and Enheduanna's poetic prowess to the economic acumen of women traders. It's a lesson in inclusivity that still rings true today. A society that empowers all its members is one that thrives. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the past. For all their advancements, Sumer was no feminist utopia. Their society was a tapestry woven with contradictions. Women had rights, but those rights were often contingent on their relationships with men. They could own property, but only if the family tree had no male branches left. Sumerian laws could be as arbitrary as they were progressive, a reflection of a world still grappling with the complexities of gender dynamics. This brings us to the heart of why understanding women in Sumer matters today. It highlights the ongoing struggle for gender equality and the delicate balance between progress and tradition. In a world where the glass ceiling still exists, albeit in different forms, the stories of Sumerian women remind us of the importance of perseverance, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of equality. They were the unsung architects of their society, building a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge us to this day. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Sumerian women, what's the punchy takeaway? It's this. While history is often written by the victors, the kings, conquerors, and rulers, it's the stories of those who navigated the margins that reveal the true complexity of human civilization. The women of Sumer were not just passive footnotes in history. They were active participants, shaping their world in ways that resonate through millennia. Their legacy is a testament to the power of determination and the enduring impact of those who dare to defy societal norms. In the end, the tale of Sumerian women is not just a historical curiosity, but a mirror reflecting our own struggles and triumphs. It's a story that urges us to look beyond the romanticized past and confront the gritty realities of progress. It challenges us to question how far we've come and how far we still have to go, reminding us that history is not just a record of what was, but a guidepost for what could be. So the next time you find yourself pondering the mysteries of the ancient world, remember that beneath the layers of time lies a story as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. And that's the kind of history lesson worth falling asleep to, armed with newfound knowledge and a sense of connection to the past. If you had a time machine and a passion for ancient economics, you'd definitely want to start by the Assyrian Empire, circa 900 to 600 BCE, located smack dab in what we now call northern Iraq. This wasn't just any old patch of dirt. It was prime real estate for trade. Picture an empire that was basically the Wall Street of the ancient world, with a side of aggressive expansionism for good measure. The Assyrians didn't just sit around waiting for caravans to pass by. They built and maintained a sprawling trade network that would give today's logistics companies a run for their money. The Assyrians knew how to pick a location, They nestled themselves between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which wasn't just convenient for agriculture, but also a strategic sweet spot for trade routes. Imagine being the middleman for goods flowing from Anatolia in the north, Egypt in the west, Persia in the east, and the Arabian Peninsula in the south. They were like the Amazon Prime of their day, minus the 2-day shipping guarantee, of course. Now, let's talk commodities. The Assyrians had a penchant for textiles and metals. Think of it as the ancient world's version of stocks and bonds. Textiles were a big deal, especially because the Assyrians had access to some high-quality wool from their sheep, which were probably the most pampered animals since Cleopatra's asp. They exported these textiles far and wide, making a tidy profit in the process. And then there were metals. They imported tin from as far away as Iran and Anatolia to make bronze, which was the cutting-edge tech of the time. Forget your iPhone 15. Bronze was the must-have material for tools and weapons. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some quaint barter system where everyone went home happy with a new goat. The Assyrians were running a sophisticated operation. They had a complex system of credit and debt, complete with contracts inscribed on clay tablets. It was like the first version of a credit card statement, but with more cuneiform and less paper. They even had something akin to insurance for their trade ventures, which shows just how far ahead they were in terms of economic strategy. The idea that ancient trade was just swapping goods like kids trading Pokémon cards is a charming myth, but a myth nonetheless. The Assyrians also mastered the art of diplomacy and intimidation. They knew that sometimes a good trade deal required a little muscle. Their armies weren't just for show. They were the enforcement arm of their economic policy. You could say they were the original offer you can't refuse kind of guys. With an empire stretching over 540,000 square kilometers at its peak, they had plenty of leverage to make sure their trade routes remained secure and profitable. In essence, the Assyrian trade network was a marvel of ancient economics. They weren't just trading goods. They were exporting their influence and power. This was an empire that knew how to leverage its geographical position, its resources, and its military might to become a dominant force in the ancient world. So next time someone talks about ancient trade as a simple barter system, feel free to roll your eyes and tell them about the Assyrians, the real deal in ancient global commerce. But let's shift gears from empire-wide strategy to the nitty-gritty of daily life on the trade routes, where Assyrian traders weren't just sipping tea and signing contracts all day. Nope, these folks were the road warriors of their age, navigating a labyrinth of roads that were as crucial to their success as the goods they carried. Think of these roads like the ancient Silk Road's less glamorous cousin, functional, but without the exotic allure. The Assyrians knew that infrastructure was everything. Without a solid network of roads, even the most compelling trade goods are just fancy paperweights. So, they invested heavily in constructing and maintaining an impressive array of paths and highways across their empire. These roads stretched like the ancient equivalent of a spider's web, connecting major cities such as Nineveh and Asher with far-flung trade outposts. Some routes even extended hundreds of miles, with rest stations along the way that were the ancient world's version of highway rest stops, minus the fast food. But let's not pretend these roads were always a stroll in the park. Picture this. You're an Assyrian trader carting a load of textiles across a dusty stretch of road. Suddenly, a sandstorm hits, and you're left squinting into the gritty wind, wondering if you should have become a scribe instead. Weather wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a legitimate threat, turning roads into quagmires or blinding travelers with dust. It was like Mother Nature's way of keeping traders humble. And if the weather didn't get you, perhaps a bandit or two might. Yes, the roads were policed, but let's face it, an empire that size couldn't keep every stretch of road bandit-free. These highwaymen were the ancient world's version of toll collectors, only instead of taking a few coins, they'd happily relieve you of your entire cargo. Traders had to be wary, often traveling in caravans for safety. Safety in numbers, after all, isn't just a modern concept. Now, let's talk about the real workhorses of the Assyrian trade routes, the wheeled carts. These weren't sleek chariots or sturdy oxen-pulled carts. Rather, they were the ancient equivalent of an all-terrain vehicle, albeit with a bit more personality. The Assyrians were among the first to use two-wheeled carts for trade, which made them pioneers in logistics. Imagine a wooden cart, roughly 6 feet long, pulled by a team of equally tough donkeys, capable of carrying up to 300 kilograms of goods. It wasn't fast, but it got the job done. Just try not to think about the potholes. Moving on from the highways to the paperwork, or should we say, clay work. The Assyrian trade machine was nothing if not bureaucratic. Contracts, receipts, and even IOUs were meticulously inscribed on clay tablets, the ancient world's version of a spreadsheet. These tablets were baked, ensuring that your trade agreement was as permanent as it gets, a bit like notarized documents, but with more kiln and less notary. The intricacies of these clay tablets are a testament to the Assyrians' business acumen. Contracts often included detailed clauses about delivery times, penalties for late shipments, and even interest rates. These folks covered all their bases. And just in case you were wondering, a typical tablet could fit around 10 to 20 lines of cuneiform script. Think of it as the ancient Twitter, concise, but packed with information. But why go to all this trouble with clay tablets? Simple, trust, and transparency. In a world where a handshake wasn't enough to seal the deal, these tablets were a binding commitment. They also served as a historical record, giving us modern folks a glimpse into the economic machinery of the ancient world. Plus, they were pretty hard to forge. You'd need a steady hand and a lot of patience to imitate someone else's cuneiform. The Assyrian traders, with their wheeled carts and clay tablets, were the original hustlers of the ancient world. They faced the elements, dodged bandits, and navigated a bureaucratic maze, all while driving the economic engine of one of history's most formidable empires. It might not have been glamorous, but it was effective. And while we might romanticize the idea of ancient trade, the reality was a grind, driven by a combination of grit, strategy, and a little luck. As we continue to unravel this story, we'll delve deeper into the social dynamics at play, the role of local markets, and how the lives of these traders were intertwined with the fate of the empire itself. So hold onto your wheeled carts, because the journey through Assyrian trade networks is far from over. Now, while our Assyrian traders were busy navigating dirt paths and dodging the occasional bandit, the folks back at the political helm were playing a game of chess that would make even grandmasters sweat. Our story takes a turn into the cutthroat world of ancient geopolitics, where alliances were as fickle as a cat's affection, and wars were fought not just over land, but over control of lucrative trade routes. Think Game of Thrones, but with more cuneiform and fewer dragons. The Assyrian kings were not just figureheads lounging on thrones, they were the ultimate multitaskers of their day. Imagine a blend of CEO, military strategist, and PR manager wrapped in one. They wielded their power not just through military might, but by forging alliances that could make or break their trade network. Take, for instance, Tiglath-Pileser III, who reigned from 745 to 727 BCE. This guy was a rock star in the annals of ancient rulers. He expanded the empire extensively, turning it into a powerhouse that controlled crucial trade corridors. Under his rule, the Assyrians didn't just conquer, they incorporated, ensuring that newly acquired territories became integral parts of their economic machine. But let's not get too cozy with this romantic notion of wise rulers and golden ages. The reality was often a hot mess of backstabbing and betrayal. Alliances with neighboring states were as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. One moment you're trading ivory and precious metals with a friendly neighbor, the next you're at war, because someone decided that your border was looking a little too tempting. The Assyrian kings knew that maintaining control over trade routes was a balancing act, like walking a tightrope while juggling flaming swords. Wars were a double-edged sword, pun entirely intended. On one hand, they could open up new trade routes and resources. On the other, they could disrupt existing ones faster than you can say, supply chain issues. Take the conquest of Egypt by Esarhaddon in 671 BCE, for example. By bringing Egypt into the fold, the Assyrians gained access to the riches of the Nile, bolstering their trade network. But these expansions also stretched their resources thin and increased the risk of rebellions. It's reminiscent of modern-day companies expanding too quickly, only to find themselves unable to manage their sprawling empires. And speaking of rebellions, let's not forget the role of the ever-volatile vassal states. These were regions that had been conquered and brought under Assyrian control, but they weren't exactly thrilled about it. They were like the teenage kids of the ancient world, rebellious, moody, and always on the lookout for an opportunity to break free. Each rebellion was a potential trade disruption, threatening the seamless flow of goods across the empire. The Assyrian kings had to keep these states in line through a combination of military presence and economic incentives. They were the original carrot-and-stick diplomats. Now, let's zoom in on the kings themselves. They were the original master marketers, branding their empire as a force to be reckoned with. They understood the power of perception. Just as modern CEOs spin narratives about their companies, Assyrian kings spun tales of divine mandate and military invincibility. Their annals were filled with grandiose claims of victory and divine favor. Think of it as the ancient version of a press release. But the harsh reality was that their reigns were often fraught with internal dissent and external threats. Managing an empire was no walk in the hanging gardens. Economically, the Assyrians were constantly trying to stay ahead of the curve. They understood that economic stability was the backbone of their military might. A prosperous empire could fund armies, build infrastructure, and keep the wheels of trade turning. This was the ultimate balancing act of power and prosperity. The Assyrians were among the first to implement a standard system of weights and measures, ensuring that trade transactions were consistent and fair, or as fair as things got in those days. It was a move straight out of the modern playbook of standardization, aiming to eliminate discrepancies and streamline commerce. Meanwhile, the kings were busy playing diplomatic chess, forming strategic alliances with other powerful empires like Babylon and Elam. These alliances were as much about trade as they were about politics. They were the original free trade agreements, ensuring that goods, ideas, and influence flowed across borders. But like any good soap opera, these alliances were rife with drama and deceit. They could turn on a dime, leading to wars that would disrupt trade and send shockwaves through the economy. One of the most interesting aspects of Assyrian political strategy was their use of deportation. When they conquered a region, they often relocated large groups of people to other parts of the empire. This wasn't just about breaking up potential rebellions. It was also a clever way to redistribute skills and labor. It was like moving chess pieces across a board, ensuring that every part of the empire was economically viable. It's a strategy that echoes through the ages, reminiscent of modern attempts to manage migration and labor distribution. In the end, the Assyrian kings were master tacticians, navigating a perilous landscape of politics and trade. They understood that their empire's prosperity depended on a delicate balance of military power, economic savvy, and political diplomacy. And while their reigns were often turbulent, they laid the groundwork for the complex trade networks that would define the ancient world. But let's not wrap things up just yet. The story of the Assyrian trade network is far from over. In the next installment, we'll dive into the social dynamics that underpinned this vast economic system. We'll explore the role of local markets, the lives of the traders, and how the empire's fortunes were intertwined with those of its people. So stay tuned, because the ancient world still has plenty of secrets to reveal. All right, let's roll up our sleeves and dive into the cultural melting pot that was the Assyrian trade network. Picture this. You're an Assyrian trader, not just hawking wool or bronze, but also inadvertently swapping culture like it's the hardest TikTok trend. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill marketplace. It was a vibrant exchange of ideas and innovations, with the Assyrians smack in the middle of it all. Now, when we talk about cultural exchanges, we're not just yakking about a few trinkets or a couple of spices here and there. We're talking about the full buffet of ancient cultural exchange, everything from art and technology to ideas that would shape civilizations. The Assyrians, with their sprawling trade routes, were unwittingly like the influencers of their age, spreading ideas as freely as they did goods. Picture Instagram, but with more cuneiform and fewer selfies. Take spices, for instance. These weren't just about adding a little zing to your mutton stew. Spices were the luxury goods of their time, the Ferraris of the ancient world. They traveled vast distances from places like India and Arabia, weaving their way into Assyrian trade networks. But along with the heady aromas came the intangible, cooking techniques, medicinal uses, and even religious practices. It's like every pinch of cinnamon carried with it a story, a tradition, a way of life from lands far beyond the Assyrian borders. And let's not forget precious stones, those glittering gems that weren't just eye candy. They were symbols of power, wealth, and divine favor. The Assyrians had access to lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian from the Indus Valley, and a treasure trove of other stones. But these weren't just for adorning the necks of the elite. They carried with them artistic styles and craftsmanship techniques that seeped into Assyrian culture, influencing everything from architecture to jewelry design. Think of it as the ancient version of a design trend going viral. The real magic happened in the bustling markets, where a Babylonian merchant might huddle with an Assyrian trader, swapping not just goods but stories, myths, and even scientific knowledge. It was like a TED talk, but with more incense and less PowerPoint. This exchange of ideas was crucial to the technological advancements of the time. Consider the Assyrian use of iron tools and weapons. While they weren't the first to dabble in iron, they certainly mastered it, thanks to the cross-pollination of techniques and technologies from various cultures. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't all cumber and cultural enlightenment. There were tensions, rivalries, and a fair share of exploitation. The allure of new ideas and goods often masked the harsher realities of trade, economic domination, cultural erasure, and the subjugation of peoples. Imagine a world where the richer cultures often steamrolled over the less powerful ones, absorbing their innovations without a second thought. It's a tale as old as time, one that echoes in the corridors of history. Yet, amid this complex web of exchange, the Assyrians were more than mere middlemen. They were cultural curators, selecting, adapting, and disseminating ideas that suited their needs and ambitions. They understood that cultural influence was a form of power, one that could bolster their empires, standing in ways that swords and spears couldn't. By integrating foreign concepts, they not only enriched their own culture, but also solidified their position as a dominant force in the ancient world. And let's talk about technology. The Assyrians were no slouches when it came to engineering. Their innovations in irrigation, for example, were a testament to their ability to learn and adapt. Incorporating techniques from their trade partners, they turned arid lands into fertile fields, ensuring that their empire remained well-fed and robust. It was an early lesson in sustainability, long before the term became a buzzword. Even the Assyrian writing system, cuneiform, was influenced by their interactions with neighboring cultures. While they didn't invent it, they certainly refined and expanded it, using it to document everything from trade agreements to epic tales. These clay tablets became a repository of knowledge, a means of preserving and transmitting culture across generations. In the grand scheme of things, the Assyrians were like the original content creators, crafting a narrative of cultural supremacy that would echo through the ages. They understood that to control the flow of goods was to control the flow of ideas. And in an era where knowledge was as valuable as gold, they held the keys to an empire that was as much intellectual as it was territorial. So, as we ponder the legacy of the Assyrian trade networks, let's remember that their influence was not just in the tangible goods they traded, but in the intangible ideas they shared. In a world where cultural exchange was both a boon and a battleground, the Assyrians managed to wield it as a tool of empire building. As we move forward in our exploration, we'll continue to unravel the threads of this fascinating tapestry, delving deeper into the social dynamics that underpin this vast network. Stay tuned, because the Assyrian saga is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more intrigue and insight. And now, as we pivot into the final act of our Assyrian saga, it's time to face the not-so-glamorous truth. Even the mightiest empires have their expiration dates. The Assyrians, with their once indomitable trade networks, were no exception. So, what went wrong for these ancient trade titans? Imagine a house of cards built on shifting sands, ambitious, impressive, but inherently unstable. In the end, a combination of external pressures, internal strife, and the relentless march of time pulled the strings of their eventual decline. By the late 7th century BCE, the Assyrian Empire was like an overextended credit card, maxed out and teetering on the brink. Their sprawling territories, once a testament to their military and economic prowess, became their Achilles' heel. Managing such vast lands required more than just brute force. It demanded resources, diplomacy, and a whole lot of luck. The empire's borders were constantly under threat from rival states and rebellious vassals. The Babylonians, Medes, and even former allies turned adversaries were all keen to take a slice of the Assyrian pie. Internally, the wheels were coming off the cart. Political infighting and succession crises weakened central authority. When your empire is as large as the Assyrians, even a minor hiccup in leadership can send ripples through the economy. Assyrian kings, once the linchpins of power and stability, became embroiled in disputes that left the empire vulnerable. It was like watching a high-wire act where the acrobat suddenly decides to argue with his safety net. Economically, the Assyrians found themselves stretched thin. The cost of maintaining their military, infrastructure, and administration was astronomical, even by ancient standards. If you were to tally up their expenses, it'd be like trying to keep a fleet of luxury cars running on a fast food budget. The once profitable trade routes began to falter, disrupted by warfare and political instability. In a world where supply chain disruptions weren't just an inconvenience, but a matter of survival, this spelled disaster. Moreover, the very trade networks that had once fueled their growth now became conduits for their decline. As rival powers like the Babylonians and Persians grew stronger, they began to strangle the Assyrian networks, cutting off access to vital resources. Imagine your competitors setting up shop right next door, offering better deals and faster service. It was a hostile takeover, ancient style. Now, let's talk about the myth of invincibility. The Assyrians, for all their might, were not immune to the seductive allure of their own propaganda. They believed their own legends of divine favor and military supremacy, failing to recognize the shifting sands beneath their feet. It's a tale as old as time. Power can blind even the most astute leaders. Their reliance on intimidation and force, while effective in the short term, sowed seeds of resentment among conquered peoples who were all too eager to see the Assyrians fall. The fall itself was swift and brutal. The combined forces of the Medes, Babylonians, and Scythians struck in 612 BCE, capturing and sacking the Assyrian capital of Nineveh. It was a cataclysmic event, akin to the fall of Rome centuries later, a moment that marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. The empire that had once spanned from Egypt to the Persian Gulf was reduced to a memory, its legacy buried beneath the sands of time. But before we close the chapter on the Assyrians, let's take a moment to reflect on their legacy. Despite their eventual collapse, their contributions to trade, culture, and power dynamics have echoed through history. They showed that economic strength could be a pillar of empire building, a lesson that resonates with modern economies. In their relentless quest for dominance, they also demonstrated the perils of overextension and the importance of adaptability. It's a cautionary tale for any empire, ancient or modern, that seeks to conquer the world without considering the cost. In the end, the Assyrians left behind a complex tapestry of innovation and ambition, a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless drive for progress. They remind us that even in failure, there is value in the lessons learned. So, as we ponder the rise and fall of this ancient powerhouse, let's carry forward the knowledge that history is not just a record of what was, but a guide to what could be. It's a reminder that in the grand theater of human endeavor, every empire is but a chapter, and the story always continues. If you think modern politics is a rough-and-tumble circus, wait till you hear about the Roman Republic. Picture a world without Twitter, but with all the drama, where senators swapped verbal jabs in the forum instead of online. The Roman Republic was like a toga-clad reality show, except the stakes were a bit higher than a rose ceremony. It was the fate of an entire civilization. Now, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was the Republic. It kicked off around 509 BCE, when the Romans decided they'd had enough of kings. They ousted their last monarch, Tarquin the Proud. His name pretty much says it all, and embarked on a grand experiment in self-governance. But let's be real, this wasn't democracy as we know it. It was more like a club for the elite, where the rich and powerful got to call the shots. The Senate, that august body of Roman politics, was essentially a VIP lounge for the aristocracy. With around 300 members at its height, it was the place where old money met ambition. Picture a room full of men in togas, each with a nose so high in the air it could scrape the ceiling. But these guys weren't just sipping wine and talking philosophy. They were engaged in a full-contact sport of political maneuvering, where alliances were as fickle as a Roman weather forecast. Running for office in the Republic was no small feat. It required serious cash. Think the ancient equivalent of a super PAC. Candidates had to fund lavish public games and feasts to win over the masses. Gladiator games were the campaign ads of the day, and a well-placed bribe could do wonders for your poll numbers. In fact, some candidates spent so much on these spectacles that they ended up in debt, much like modern politicians with their campaign loans. Cicero, the famed orator, once lamented that a candidate must be a spendthrift to win favor. The elections were less about policies and more about who could throw the biggest and best parties. And let's not forget the toga party, allegedly a staple of Roman social life. While there's little evidence they invented the frat-style toga party, they certainly knew how to enjoy themselves. As Rome expanded, so did its ambitions. By 275 BCE, Rome had conquered most of the Italian peninsula, and it wasn't long before they cast their eyes across the Mediterranean. The Republic wasn't shy about throwing its weight around, and soon it was embroiled in a series of conflicts known as the Punic Wars. These clashes with Carthage were like the heavyweight bouts of the ancient world, with elephants and warships instead of boxing gloves. The Second Punic War alone lasted from 218 to 201 BCE, a 17-year slugfest that saw Rome's fortunes swing like a pendulum. But Rome emerged victorious, and in the process, it seized control of key territories in Spain and North Africa, planting the seeds for an empire. Now, here's where we bust a few myths. The idea of the noble, simple Roman citizen soldier fighting for the glory of the Republic is a charming tale, but not entirely accurate. The Roman legions were professional and well compensated. Soldiers served for an average of 16 years and were often rewarded with land, which was a pretty sweet deal. And as Rome's conquests grew, so did its wealth, which led to a massive influx of slaves. By the late Republic, slaves made up as much as 30% of Italy's population, essentially fueling the economy while the elite lounged in their villas. The expansion of Rome wasn't just about military might. It was driven by practical needs. More land meant more resources and more places to send restless citizens. The Republic's roads, those famous Roman highways, were built to move legions swiftly, but also to facilitate trade and maintain control over sprawling territories. These roads stretched for over 50,000 miles, a testament to Roman engineering prowess and their insatiable appetite for expansion. Yet, with great power came great complexity. The Republic system was designed for a city-state, not a sprawling empire. As Rome grew, so did the challenges of governance. The Senate was often bogged down by infighting, and the plebeians, the common folk, were increasingly restless. They demanded more rights and representation, leading to the creation of the tribune of the plebs, a position meant to protect their interests. But even this was a double-edged sword, as it often became a stepping stone for ambitious politicians looking to climb the ranks. And let's not gloss over the fact that the Roman Republic was, at its core, an aristocracy disguised as a democracy. Power was concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families, and political offices were often passed down like family heirlooms. The famous cursus honorum, or course of honors, was the ladder every aspiring politician had to climb, but it was riddled with obstacles that favored the elite. To reach the top, one had to navigate a minefield of alliances, betrayals, and backroom deals. It was like House of Cards, but with more stabbing and fewer monologues. Of course, the Republic had its fair share of colorful characters. Take Gaius Marius, a military reformer who rose from humble beginnings to become a consul, a position he held 7 times, breaking all the rules. His military reforms made the legions more professional, but they also shifted soldiers' loyalty from the Republic to their commanders, setting the stage for future power struggles. Then there's Sulla, the dictator who marched on Rome not once, but twice, proving that nothing says "I love democracy" like a good old-fashioned coup. By the late Republic, the political scene was a hot mess of corruption, ambition, and social upheaval. The wealth gap had widened to a chasm, and populist leaders like the Gracchi brothers attempted reforms to redistribute land and wealth. Their efforts were met with violent resistance, and both brothers met untimely deaths, a grim reminder that advocating for the common man in Rome was a risky business. The Republic's first foray into empire building was both a triumph and a tragedy. Rome had grown from a modest city-state to a dominant Mediterranean power, but the very systems that had propelled it to greatness were starting to buckle under the strain. The Republic was like a chariot careening down a hill, impressive to watch, but you knew a crash was inevitable. As we wrap up this first act of our Roman drama, it's clear that the Republic's rise was a complex tapestry of ambition, innovation, and sheer audacity. Rome's early successes laid the groundwork for an empire that would span continents, but they also sowed the seeds of its own undoing. Stay tuned as we continue this saga, diving deeper into the machinations and mayhem that transformed the Republic into an empire. Until next time, remember, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, or at least enjoy a good toga party. And speaking of drama, let's dive headfirst into the Punic Wars, the ancient world's equivalent of a heavyweight championship series. We're talking Rome versus Carthage, two Mediterranean powerhouses going at it like frenemies with a grudge that spanned continents and decades. Think of it as an ancient version of a corporate merger gone wrong, with more elephants and fewer HR meetings. The Punic Wars kicked off in 264 BCE, when Rome and Carthage clashed over Sicily. That sun-kissed island they both wanted like it was prime real estate on Mediterranean monopoly. Over the course of 3 wars, these titanic adversaries would duke it out on land and sea, with Rome finally emerging as the undefeated heavyweight champ. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The First Punic War, 264–241 BCE, was like a 23-year-long tug-of-war, complete with naval battles and land skirmishes. Rome had never been much of a seafaring power, but necessity is the mother of invention. They built a fleet from scratch, thanks to a little reverse engineering of a captured Carthaginian ship. Picture it, Romans scuttling about like ancient mechanics, figuring out how to turn a bunch of wood and nails into a war machine. By the end of it, Rome had seized control of Sicily, marking its first step toward becoming the Mediterranean's landlord. Now, let's talk cash. War isn't cheap, and the First Punic War was no exception. The costs were staggering. Rome reportedly spent over 200,000 talents of silver, equivalent to billions in today's terms. The sheer economic drain was enough to make even the most seasoned Roman senator sweat in his toga. Yet, despite the eye-watering expense, Rome's victory brought them a nice consolation prize: hefty war indemnities from Carthage, and of course, Sicily itself, which became Rome's first official province. Fast forward to the Second Punic War, 218–201 BCE, and here's where things get really spicy. Enter Hannibal Barca, Carthage's military genius, and a man whose name still causes shivers in Roman history books. Hannibal had a plan, a bold one at that. He decided to invade Italy by crossing the Alps with an army that included war elephants. Yes, you heard that right. Elephants. In the Alps. It's the kind of audacious move that sounds like something out of a Hollywood blockbuster, but it was very much real. These elephants, numbering around 37, were the tanks of their day. But crossing the Alps, that was a logistical nightmare, akin to taking a road trip to IKEA with a car full of flat-pack furniture and no directions. Yet, against all odds, Hannibal did it, though at a steep cost. The journey decimated his forces. Half his men and most of his elephants didn't make it. But the element of surprise, priceless. Once in Italy, Hannibal unleashed a series of victories that had Rome quaking in its sandals. The Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE was particularly brutal. Hannibal's forces encircled and annihilated a Roman army of 86,000, delivering a blow that would echo through history. It's often cited as one of the greatest tactical feats in military history, a masterclass in battlefield strategy that's still studied in military academies today. But here's the kicker. Despite these early successes, Hannibal just couldn't seal the deal. Rome, with its seemingly inexhaustible supply of manpower and resources, bounced back like a gladiator who just refused to stay down. The war dragged on for another decade, with Rome slowly but surely reclaiming lost ground. In 204 BCE, they took the fight to Carthage itself. Led by Scipio Africanus, the Romans landed in North Africa and put the squeeze on Hannibal, who was hastily recalled to defend his homeland. The final showdown came at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. This time, it was Hannibal's turn to be outmaneuvered. Scipio had learned from his rival's playbook, employing clever tactics to neutralize those fearsome elephants and secure a decisive Roman victory. Carthage was left with no choice but to sue for peace, ceding vast territories and paying yet another hefty indemnity that left them financially crippled. The economic fallout from these wars was immense. Rome emerged as the dominant Mediterranean power, but it came at a cost. The Republic's coffers were drained, and the socio-economic landscape had shifted dramatically. Veterans returning home found their farms neglected and often sold them off, leading to the rise of vast estates owned by the elite, a pattern that would have far-reaching consequences. And what about those elephants? While they didn't revolutionize warfare as Hannibal had hoped, their legend endures. The sheer audacity of marching them across the Alps is a testament to human and pachyderm resilience. It's like the historical equivalent of trying to fit a couch through a narrow doorway. You might not succeed, but you'll have a story worth telling. As Rome basked in the glow of victory, it didn't take long for ambition to outstrip practicality. The Republic was now an empire in all but name, with vast new territories to manage and defend. The Senate found itself grappling with the complexities of governance on an unprecedented scale. The temptation of power and wealth was too enticing for many, leading to political machinations that made the Punic Wars look like child's play. Yet, for all the triumphs, the shadow of Carthage lingered. The Third Punic War, 149–146 BCE, was less a war and more a mop-up operation, a final act of vengeance against a foe that was already on its knees. Rome sacked Carthage, razed it to the ground, and supposedly salted its fields. It's a tale often told with a touch of dramatic flair, but in reality, it was more about ensuring Carthage could never rise again rather than any agricultural spite. The Punic Wars were a crucible of conflict that forged Rome into a superpower, but they also set the stage for future troubles. The Republic had become an empire, but it was an empire that often found itself too big for its own toga. The challenges of managing such a vast realm would only grow, leading to internal strife that would eventually rock the very foundations of Roman society. But that, dear friends, is a tale for another day. For now, let's marvel at the audacity of Hannibal, the resilience of Rome, and the enduring power of a good strategy, even if it involves elephants in the Alps. Until next time, remember, history might not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, and sometimes it brings elephants along for the ride. As the dust settled from the Punic Wars, Rome found itself standing tall, albeit a bit wobbly on its new, oversized, empire-sized sandals. The Republic had a new problem. It was bursting at the seams, and not in a "we need a bigger venue" kind of way. Enter the Gracchi brothers, two reformers whose ideas were as divisive as pineapple on pizza. These guys were the original disruptors, and their story is a classic case of idealism smashing headlong into political reality. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, the ultimate sibling duo, were like the Robin Hoods of Rome, but instead of tights and archery skills, they had togas and oratory prowess. Their mission, land reform. Their target, the wealthy elite who hoarded vast estates like ancient real estate moguls, while the common folk were left with nothing but dusty dreams. Tiberius, the elder brother, kicked off this saga in 133 BCE when he proposed the Lex Sempronia Agraria. Sounds fancy, right? It was a land redistribution bill aimed at capping the amount of public land one could hold and redistributing the excess to the landless peasants. Now, you might think this was a no-brainer, but in Rome, suggesting such reforms was akin to asking a lion to share its dinner. The Senate, a bastion of old money and vested interests, reacted like a cat seeing a cucumber. They were not amused. Tiberius, however, was undeterred. He bypassed the Senate and took his bill directly to the plebeian assembly, setting off a political firestorm that would have made even the most seasoned gladiator sweat. The public loved him, but the Senate, not so much. They accused him of overstepping his boundaries, and it wasn't long before things turned ugly. In a move that would make Machiavelli nod in approval, a faction of senators resorted to violence. Tiberius was clubbed to death along with 300 of his supporters in what was essentially a political mob hit. It was a grim reminder that in Rome, the price of reform often came with a side of tragedy. But fear not, for Gaius Gracchus picked up the torch, or rather, the flaming pitchfork. A decade later, in 123 BCE, he stepped into the political arena with even more ambitious reforms. Gaius was the kind of guy who didn't just think outside the box. He turned the box into a soapbox and preached from it. He expanded on his brother's land reform efforts, introduced measures to subsidize grain prices and sought to extend Roman citizenship to allied Italian states. It was an agenda as packed as a Roman amphitheater on game day. His reforms were popular among the masses, but predictably, the Senate saw them as a threat to their cushy status quo. Gaius was charismatic, eloquent, and had a knack for rallying the people. Yet, even he couldn't escape the political quicksand. The Senate, nervous about his growing influence, eventually declared a state of emergency, effectively giving themselves a blank check to deal with him. The result? Gaius met a similar fate to his brother, dying in 121 BCE amidst a violent clash with the Senate's forces. The Gracchi brothers' tale is one for the ages, a story of idealism crushed under the weight of entrenched power. They highlighted the chasm between Rome's rhetoric of republican virtue and its reality of oligarchic control. The brothers had exposed the Republic's dirty secret. The system was rigged, and the deck was stacked against those who dared to challenge the status quo. Their deaths didn't solve Rome's problems. If anything, they magnified them. The social and economic disparities they highlighted only grew worse. The wealth gap in Rome was wider than the Tiber, with a small elite class controlling the majority of the wealth, while the average citizen was left to fight for scraps. This disparity was like a slow-burning fuse, inching its way toward a powder keg of social unrest. Economically, the Republic was a patchwork quilt of contradictions. While Rome's conquests had filled its coffers with riches, those riches were concentrated in the hands of a few. The vast influx of slaves from conquered territories further skewed the labor market, leaving free Roman citizens struggling to compete. Picture a job market where the top candidates are all unpaid interns. Only these interns are slaves, and they're doing all the work for free. The Gracchi brothers' attempts to address these issues were noble, but they also underscored a hard truth. Rome's political system was less about public service and more about self-service. Corruption was rampant, and political office was a means to personal enrichment rather than public good. Senators and magistrates often lined their own pockets, treating public funds like their personal piggy banks. The Senate, for all its prestige, was more interested in maintaining its grip on power than in addressing the root causes of social unrest. It was like trying to stop a flood with a bucket and a lot of wishful thinking. Political corruption was as common as toga parties, and the Senate's attempts to control the chaos were about as effective as using a scroll to stop a charging elephant. The Republic was a paradox wrapped in a toga. It expanded to become an empire, yet its internal structures were crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. The Gracchi brothers' legacy was a testament to the fact that Rome's political system was as unstable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Their story was a harbinger of the tumultuous times to come, where Rome would face challenges that no amount of gladiator games or public spectacles could distract from. As we leave the Gracchi brothers in the annals of history, it's clear that their revolutionary ideas, though crushed, left an indelible mark on Rome. They had dared to challenge the status quo, and though they paid the ultimate price, their actions set the stage for a new wave of reformers and revolutionaries. The seeds of change had been sown, and while the Gracchi brothers might not have lived to see their vision realized, their influence would echo through the corridors of power for years to come. In the next chapter of Rome's unfolding drama, the Republic would continue to grapple with these internal tensions as new figures emerge to take up the mantle of change or chaos. But for now, we pause as the stage is set for more upheaval and Rome braces itself for the next act in its grand, tumultuous saga. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the machinations of this ancient world, where the stakes were high, the togas were higher, and the drama was nothing short of epic. As Rome teetered on the brink of chaos, entered Julius Caesar, the man who would play Rome like a high-stakes poker game, with the Rubicon serving as his all-in moment. Born in 100 BCE into the patrician Julian clan, Caesar was the kind of guy who made waves wherever he went. He was ambitious, charismatic, and had a knack for turning the political tides in his favor. You could say he was the original influencer, minus the Instagram, but with a much sharper sword. Let's set the stage. By 49 BCE, Caesar was a military powerhouse, having conquered Gaul and expanded Roman territory up to the English Channel. This wasn't just a casual Sunday afternoon stroll. It was a decade-long campaign that saw him subjugate tribes across a region roughly the size of modern France. These conquests brought him immense wealth and legions of loyal soldiers, the kind of loyalty that made even the most hardened senators nervous. But back in Rome, the Senate was less than thrilled with Caesar's growing power. They saw him as a threat to the Republic's fragile status quo, a maverick who played by his own rules. Caesar, on the other hand, viewed the Senate as a stumbling block to his destiny. He had a vision where the old guard made way for new blood, preferably his own, and the Republic transformed into something grander. The tension came to a head when the Senate, in an act of political brinkmanship, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Now, if there's one thing you didn't do in ancient Rome, it was tell a man like Caesar to back down. On January 10, 49 BCE, he made his fateful decision. With the words, Alia iacta est, the die is cast, he crossed the Rubicon River with his army, a deliberate act of war against the Senate. It was like flipping the board in the midst of a chess game, only with much higher stakes. Crossing the Rubicon was more than just a geographical move. It was a declaration. The Senate's reaction was predictable: panic, paranoia, and a swift retreat. Many senators, including Caesar's old ally-turned-rival Pompey, fled to Greece, leaving Rome in a state of organized chaos. Caesar's march on Rome was swift and efficient. He entered the city unopposed, a testament to both his military prowess and the Senate's lack of preparation. Now, let's talk economics, because the costs of Caesar's ambition were steep, literally. The civil war that followed drained the Republic's coffers faster than a toga party with an open bar. Caesar funded his campaigns through a combination of borrowed wealth, confiscated estates, and the spoils of war. It was a fiscal strategy that would make any modern economist cringe, but it worked. The capture of Rome's treasury allowed him to pay his troops and solidify his control. But this power grab wasn't just about money or military might. It was about reshaping Rome itself. Caesar's reforms were extensive. He restructured the debt system, redistributed land, and expanded the Senate to include his supporters. He even introduced the Julian calendar, the precursor to the one we use today. But these changes, while significant, were also strategic. They were designed to cement his power and undercut his enemies, many of whom were still licking their wounds in exile. The Senate, meanwhile, was reduced to a shadow of its former self, its members forced to play along or risk losing everything. For Caesar, the Republic was his sandbox, and he was the kid with the biggest shovel. His actions blurred the line between republic and dictatorship, setting the stage for the imperial Rome that would follow. It was political theater at its finest, where every move was calculated, every gesture imbued with meaning. Yet, even as he consolidated power, Caesar couldn't escape the specter of his own ambition. His rapid rise left him with a long list of enemies, both old and new. The Senate saw him as a tyrant in the making, a would-be king in a city that prided itself on its anti-monarchical roots. This anxiety wasn't unfounded. Despite his protestations of loyalty to the Republic, Caesar's actions often spoke of a man who saw himself as its destined ruler. This simmering tension reached its boiling point on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. In one of history's most infamous betrayals, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators, including his friend Brutus. The scene was as dramatic as it was tragic, a political assassination that played out like a Shakespearean tragedy, complete with the iconic, if apocryphal, line, "Et tu, Brute." It was the ultimate mic drop, one that echoed through the halls of power and signaled the end of an era. Caesar's death was supposed to restore the Republic, but instead it plunged Rome into further chaos. The power vacuum he left behind was like a black hole, pulling in ambitious figures eager to fill it. What followed was a series of civil wars that would make the earlier conflicts look like child's play. The Senate, once the heart of Roman politics, was now a pawn in a larger game, its influence waning as new power players emerged. The irony of Caesar's assassination is that it failed to stop the very thing it aimed to prevent. Instead of restoring the Republic, it accelerated its transformation into an empire. Caesar's heir, Octavian, would later become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, marking the official end of the Republic. The Senate, now a ceremonial relic, served more as an advisory body than a governing one, its power eclipsed by the emperor's will. In the end, Caesar's legacy was a complicated one. He was a visionary and a tyrant, a reformer and a dictator. His actions forever altered the course of Roman history, leaving a legacy that was as inspiring as it was cautionary. He showed that power, once seized, was a difficult beast to tame, and that ambition, unchecked, could consume even the mightiest of leaders. As we pause our narrative, it's clear that Caesar's story is a testament to the complexity of human ambition. The Republic, once a beacon of civic virtue, had become a stage for personal rivalries and unchecked power. The seeds of imperial Rome had been sown, and though Caesar would not live to see the full fruits of his labors, his influence would resonate for centuries. The drama was far from over, and as Rome continued its transformation, the echoes of Caesar's ambition would reverberate throughout history, shaping the empire and the world in ways that few could have imagined. Stay tuned as we unravel the next chapter, where Rome's story continues in its relentless march toward empire, power, and the age of Augustus. As the curtain fell on the Republic and Rome ushered in the age of emperors, the stage was set for a saga of power plays and betrayals that would make any soap opera look like a children's storytime. Augustus, the shrewd heir of Julius Caesar, became the first Roman emperor in 27 BCE, marking the beginning of the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability lasting over 2 centuries. But let's not kid ourselves. This was peace through strength, the kind where Rome's legions were the neighborhood watch, standing guard over an empire that stretched from Spain to Syria, from Britain to Egypt. Augustus was a master of spin, presenting his rule as a restoration of the Republic's virtues, even as he centralized power in a way that would have made Caesar blush. Yet, beneath the empire's polished surface lay fault lines as deep as the Mediterranean. The economy was a complex beast, fueled by a vast network of trade routes, slave labor, and taxation, but it was also precarious, dependent on constant expansion to fund its military machine and public works. Rome's currency, the denarius, was the ancient world's answer to the dollar, a symbol of economic might, yet prone to inflation when emperors like Nero decided to debase it by reducing its silver content. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of printing money, but with less fanfare and more head-scratching from the accountants. The imperial system was a tightrope walk, balancing the whims of emperors with the needs of a sprawling, diverse populace. And while some rulers were competent, like Trajan, who expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent in 117 CE, others were, shall we say, less than ideal. Take Caligula, whose reign from 37 to 41 CE was a masterclass in how not to rule. Known for his eccentricities and cruelty, he once reportedly declared war on Neptune, the god of the sea, and ordered his troops to collect seashells as spoils of victory. If that doesn't scream unhinged, I'm not sure what does. As the centuries rolled on, the empire faced increasing threats from both within and without. Barbarian tribes, once content to trade at the fringes of Roman territory, grew bolder and more organized. The Goths, Vandals, and Huns weren't just names to strike fear into Roman hearts. They were living reminders that Rome's borders were as porous as a toga in a rainstorm. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths in 410 CE was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that no empire, however mighty, was invincible. The economy, once a juggernaut, began to falter under the weight of military overspending and administrative bloat. The costs of maintaining the empire's vast network of roads, aqueducts, and fortifications were astronomical, and with fewer conquests to replenish the treasury, the financial strain began to show. By the 3rd century CE, Rome's economic woes were exacerbated by a series of plagues and famines that decimated the population. The labor shortage, coupled with a reliance on slave labor, created a feedback loop of decline that even the most optimistic senators couldn't ignore. Politically, the empire was a revolving door of emperors, many of whom met untimely ends at the hands of their own guards. The crisis of the 3rd century saw over 20 emperors in 50 years, a parade of rulers whose tenures were often as brief as a Roman gladiator's winning streak. The military, once the backbone of the empire, became a double-edged sword, wielding power over the selection and deposition of emperors. It was like letting the fox guard the henhouse, only these foxes were heavily armed and had a penchant for power. Yet, despite the chaos, Rome's cultural legacy continued to flourish. The Latin language, Roman law, and engineering marvels like the Colosseum and aqueducts left an indelible mark on history. The empire's embrace of Christianity under Constantine in the early 4th century CE laid the groundwork for the Middle Ages and beyond. But while the church may have offered spiritual solace, couldn't patch up the empire's crumbling infrastructure or placate the restless legions. By the time the Western Roman Empire officially collapsed in 476 CE, with the deposition of the last emperor Romulus Augustulus, it was less a dramatic fall and more a whimpering retreat. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, would carry on the torch for another millennium, but the West was done for. The myth of Rome's noble end is just that, a myth. The reality was messier, a slow-motion train wreck of failed reforms, economic mismanagement, and external pressures that finally proved too much. And so, as we wrap up this epic tale, we're left to ponder. Have we learned from Rome's mistakes, or are we just as doomed to repeat them? It's a question as timeless as history itself, one that echoes through the ages like the cries of a Roman crowd at the Colosseum. Modern societies, with their own complex webs of politics, economics, and social strains, might do well to heed the lessons of Rome. After all, those who ignore history are doomed not just to repeat it, but to miss out on the best parts of the toga party. So here's to history, not just the stories, but the truths they reveal about the human condition, and the hope that we might just learn a thing or two along the way. Roosters and sunshine. Forget about it. Your day kicks off with a jolt in pitch-black darkness, courtesy of a raucous wake-up call from your folks, who are probably just a bit too eager to get you out of bed. It's the 1840s in England, and you're about to embark on another delightful day in the life of a coal miner. That's right. Before the sun even considers making an appearance, you're already shuffling out the door, bleary-eyed and stumbling, to join a throng of fellow miners trudging towards the pit. Now, let's not sugarcoat this. Coal mining is the job everyone loves to hate. But hey, someone's got to shovel the black gold that keeps the fires of the Industrial Revolution burning. The steam engines chugging along, powering factories and railways, are hungry beasts demanding a steady diet of coal. It's no wonder that the demand for this dusty rock is skyrocketing faster than you can say Shropshire. But before we dig deeper, pun absolutely intended, let's address the elephant, or should we say the child, in the room. Yes, you're not alone in this subterranean adventure. Children as young as 5 are part of this grim workforce. Welcome to the reality where bring your child to work day is every day, and it's not nearly as cute as it sounds. These kiddos, including your pals, are known as trappers or hurriers, tasked with opening ventilation doors or hauling coal in carts. It's a far cry from the playground, but who needs recess when you've got a mine shaft to explore, right? And if you're wondering about the logistics of your day, here's a quick rundown. You're at the pithead by about 5 a.m., and it's not until 5 p.m. that you see daylight again, assuming you're lucky and the shifts aren't extended due to high demand. That's a solid 12-hour shift, and not a minute of it spent lounging. You descend into the mine via a rickety lift or a long, winding staircase, depending on how fancy your particular mine is. Once you're down there, it's all about maneuvering through narrow, claustrophobic passageways with only the flicker of a candle lamp to guide you. Safety regulations. Oh, those are still a few decades away. For now, just keep your fingers crossed and your wits about you. The conditions are, to put it mildly, less than ideal. The air is thick with dust, and the constant risk of gas explosions, called fire damp, keeps you on edge. Ironically, the only time you might get a whiff of fresh air is in the fleeting moment you emerge, blinking and squinting, back into the daylight. And as for sunlight, well, it's more of a vague concept than anything else. Job satisfaction. Let's just say it's about as real as the tooth fairy. The Industrial Revolution is a double-edged sword for folks like you. Sure, it's driving technological progress and transforming the economy, but it's also turning human lives into mere cogs in a relentless machine. The coal you extract is the lifeblood of this new age, yet it's sucking the life out of those who mine it. The irony is as thick as the soot in your lungs. And the numbers don't lie. In 1842, a report revealed that over 10,000 children were employed in mines across Britain, some working up to 14 hours a day. Charles Dickens might romanticize the plight of the working class in his novels, but the reality is far grimmer than any fiction. The reformers are starting to take notice, though, and change is on the horizon. albeit slowly. But for now, you're stuck in the grim grind, a cog in the great machine that is the Industrial Revolution, hoping that someday, somehow, things will get better. But chin up. As the saying goes, where there's muck, there's brass. And while that might not bring much comfort when you're knee-deep in coal dust, it's a reminder that this toil is keeping the wheels of progress turning. So, as you head deeper into the mine, lantern flickering, and the echo of picks and shovels ringing in the air, remember, you're not just mining coal, you're fueling a revolution. As you plunge into the depths of this coal-fueled carnival of chaos, let's talk about the charming toolkit that defines your day. Forget sleek, modern gadgetry. We're talking about the trusty pickaxe, a tool as blunt and unforgiving as the job itself. Shovels are your constant companions, their splintered handles a reminder of the endless grind. And of course, there's the wheeled cart, designed to haul more coal than seems humanly possible. It's a primitive assembly line down here, with manpower as the engine and sweat as the lubricant. The mine itself is an architectural marvel of misery, a labyrinth of shafts and tunnels that twist and turn like a Gothic fever dream. These passageways, often just 3 or 4 feet high, force you to crouch or crawl, adding claustrophobia to your list of daily woes. The temperature is a sauna-worthy 90 degrees F, 32 degrees C, on a good day, with humidity levels that would make the Amazon blush. If you think that's bad, consider the air quality. A cocktail of coal dust and methane, with a side of potential disaster. Speaking of disasters, let's chat about accidents, a term that feels woefully inadequate. Picture this: a spark from your lamp ignites the dreaded fire damp, unleashing an explosion that shakes the earth and sends shivers down your spine. It's a boom that could rival a 4th of July celebration if it weren't so deadly. Statistics, sure thing. In 1838, a grim tally of 439 miners lost their lives in a single year to mine explosions in the UK. It's like playing Russian roulette with a full chamber. But wait, there's more. Roof collapses are the mine's coup de grace, sudden and lethal. One minute, you're scraping away at a seam of coal. The next, the ceiling's on your head, crushing any illusions of job security. These incidents are frequent enough to give déjà vu a run for its money. Now, let's zoom out and see the puppet masters pulling the strings. At the top of this coal-crusted pyramid are the industrialists, fattened on the spoils of your labor. Titans like George Stephenson, the father of railways, who helped lay the tracks for this industrial juggernaut, literally and figuratively. Their profits soared as high as the factory chimneys, while your wages stayed firmly in the gutter. A typical miner earned a pittance, about 15 shillings a week, barely enough to keep the family from starving, let alone thriving. The industrialists' wealth was built on the backs of the working class, a stark disparity that's as blatant as a coal smudge on a white shirt. These captains of industry were the rock stars of their time, celebrated for driving economic growth, while the miners, the real engines of this revolution, toiled in obscurity. It's a tale as old as time. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the gap between them is wide enough to fit a steam locomotive. But why, you ask, did people flock to this grim occupation like moths to a flame? Economic forces, my friend. The Industrial Revolution was a job-creating machine, but it was also a job destroyer, obliterating traditional crafts and forcing people to seek out new means of survival. The allure of steady, albeit meager, pay in the mines was hard to resist when faced with the specter of unemployment and starvation. And let's not forget urbanization, that double-edged sword. As cities swelled with new inhabitants, the demand for coal skyrocketed, feeding the fires of industry and domestic hearths alike. This demand created a vicious cycle. More coal needed, more miners required, more risks taken. The irony here is thicker than the soot-filled air. The very progress that promised a brighter future was built on the backs of those trapped in darkness. So, as you navigate these subterranean corridors, battling exhaustion and dodging danger, remember, you're not just mining coal. You're part of a complex web of economic forces, a cog in a colossal machine driven by the relentless engine of progress. Keep your pickaxe sharp and your wits sharper, because down here, it's survival of the fittest, and the stakes are as high as the coal dust is thick. As you're hacking away at the coal seams, it strikes noon, though you'd be forgiven for not noticing. Down here, time is a concept as abstract as art in a coal scuttle. Midday means meal time, if you can call it that. Welcome to the miner's lunch break, where the menu is about as varied as a one-note symphony. Forget about a balanced diet. Your midday feast is more of a nutritional joke. Say hello to bread, cheese, and maybe a bit of bacon if you're feeling fancy. Vegetables are as rare as a day off, and fruit might as well be a relic of ancient lore. But let's break down the economics of this culinary delight. Bread is your staple, and it's as ubiquitous as the coal dust in your hair. A loaf might cost you a couple of pennies, but when you're earning 15 shillings a week, every crumb counts. Cheese is another stalwart, more for its ability to last than its gourmet flair. Bacon, when it graces your presence, is the miner's version of caviar, a salty reminder that life outside the pit has its pleasures. Now, if you're picturing a quaint picnic scene, think again. This isn't a leisurely affair on a grassy knoll. It's a hurried squat in the dim glow of your lamp. The air is still thick with the scent of sweat and soot, and your fellow miners are huddled around, wolfing down their rations with the urgency of men who know their break is fleeting. The social dynamics in this subterranean cafeteria are as layered as the coal seams themselves. Sure, there's camaraderie. After all, nothing bonds like mutual misery. But let's not romanticize it too much. The brotherhood of the mine is forged in the fires of adversity, yes, but it's also a survival necessity. You need to trust the guy next to you to not drop a pickaxe on your foot or trigger a tunnel collapse. It's like the world's most perilous trust fall, played out daily. And speaking of brotherhood, let's talk strikes. These weren't the polished, organized labor movements you might imagine. Picture more of a chaotic, desperate plea for better conditions. Miners would down tools and demand improvements, not because they were itching for a political statement, but because they were literally trying to stay alive. In 1844, the Great Strike in the Northumberland and Durham coalfield saw thousands of miners walk out in a bid for fair wages and safer working conditions. It was a bold move, akin to poking a bear when you're already in its den. But here's the kicker. The very act of striking was a gamble with survival. With no work came no pay, and with no pay came the gnawing specter of starvation. So, while the image of miners banding together against the industrial overlords is stirring, the reality was fraught with fear and uncertainty. The stakes were nothing short of life and death, and the risks were as vast as a mine shaft's yawning darkness. In this world, the romanticized image of camaraderie is tempered by the brutal facts of survival. You and your fellow miners are not just colleagues, you're comrades in a war against the earth itself, against the very conditions that demand your toil. It's a gritty, grim alliance, one born not of choice but of necessity. Yet, for all its hardships, there's an undeniable appeal to this brotherhood. The bond you share with your fellow miners is a rare thing, a connection forged in the crucible of daily struggle, where every nod, every shared glance, is a silent acknowledgement of the shared burden. It's a testament to human resilience, to the spirit that refuses to be crushed even when the weight of the world, or at least several tons of coal, is bearing down. But let's not get too misty-eyed. At the end of the day, you're all just trying to make it through, to survive another shift, another day, in a world that seems determined to grind you down. The romantic narratives of unity and strength are tempting, but they're only part of the story. The other part is raw, unfiltered, and as hard-edged as the coal you extract. As the echoes of your break-time banter fade, and you heft your pickaxe once more, remember this. You're not just battling the Earth's crust for a living. You're navigating a complex web of economic forces, social dynamics, and personal survival. It's a world where every choice, every action, is a calculated risk, a step in the dance between life and livelihood. And as you return to the coal face, the flicker of your lamp cutting through the gloom, you're reminded once more that down here, in the belly of the beast, it's not just about the coal, it's about the grit, the guts, and the indomitable spirit that keeps you going. As you heft that pickaxe and plunge back into the mine's depths, it's striking how the afternoon shift feels like a battle against your own body. Forget the romantic notion of the tireless, rugged miner. By now, exhaustion is hitting harder than a runaway coal cart, and every muscle screams in rebellion. Your arms are leaden, your backs are not of tension, and your lungs, well, let's just say they're collecting more coal dust than air. And speaking of lungs, let's not gloss over the infamous black lung disease, miner's pneumoconiosis, if you're feeling fancy. This ailment is as much a part of mining life as the pickaxe itself, a grim souvenir from years of inhaling coal dust. The statistics are about as cheerful as a rainy day. By the late 19th century, life expectancy for miners hovered around the mid-40s, a number so low it could limbo under a picket fence. It's a chilling reminder that while you might be digging for coal, the mine is slowly digging a grave for you. But hey, let's not get too morbid without a little humor, dark as it may be. Imagine trying to explain to your future grandkids why you sound like a wheezy accordion every time you laugh. Oh, that. Just a little memento from my days as a human dust filter. The myth of the rugged, indomitable miner is a tale spun with the finest threads of exaggeration. Sure, there's grit and resilience here, but it's less about heroics and more about survival. Let's not forget you're working in conditions that make Dante's Inferno look like a luxury spa. The air is a noxious soup, the temperature rivals the Sahara, and every creak and groan of the earth is a reminder that danger is your constant companion. Society, however, views you through a lens as smudged as the coal dust on your face. On one hand, you're the unsung hero fueling the fires of the Industrial Revolution. Without your toil, the steam engines would sputter to a halt, and factories would stand silent. You're the backbone of progress, the bedrock upon which modernity is built. Cue the applause, right? But here's the kicker. You're also seen as expendable, a cog in the industrial machine. The brutal truth is that the very society that hails you as a hero also treats you as replaceable. If you fall, literally or metaphorically, there's always another desperate soul ready to step into your boots. The stark reality is that your life is valued only as long as it serves the greater economic engine. Romantic, isn't it? And let's talk about those who profit from your labor. The industrialists, perched in their opulent mansions, toast to their fortunes while you're scraping by on a pittance. The disparity is as glaring as the sun that rarely graces the mine shaft. Yet the narrative spun by society somehow paints these captains of industry as the true pioneers, conveniently glossing over the fact that their wealth flows directly from your sweat and sacrifice. But why do people continue to flock to the mines like moths to a flame? It's the relentless push-pull of economic necessity. The Industrial Revolution has obliterated traditional crafts, and the promise of steady, if meager, pay is an irresistible siren song. It's survival, plain and simple. When faced with the choice between the mine and the specter of starvation, the mine, despite its dangers, offers a glimmer of hope. Urbanization only adds fuel to this coal-driven fire. As cities swell and the demand for coal skyrockets, the cycle perpetuates itself. More coal needed means more miners required, and the risks take an increase exponentially. The irony here is thick enough to cut with a knife. The very progress that promises a brighter future is built on the backs of those trapped in darkness. So, as the afternoon wears on and the weight of the day bears down, remember, while society might see you as a hero or a cog, you're a living testament to human resilience. The stories of the rugged miner might be romanticized, but the truth is far grittier. You're not just mining coal, you're battling the very forces of nature and society, carving out a living in a world that seems determined to grind you down. Keep your wits sharp and your resolve sharper, because in this subterranean world, it's survival of the fittest, with stakes as high as the coal dust is thick. As the shift drags on, the atmosphere in the mine thickens, weighed down by more than just dust. The camaraderie you share with your fellow miners is a fragile lifeline, a bond forged in shared hardship. But let's not paint it as an unbreakable brotherhood without acknowledging the cracks. Tensions can flare, spurred by exhaustion or the oppressive conditions. It's not uncommon for tempers to ignite faster than a fire-damp explosion. Yet, even amidst this tension, there's an unspoken understanding, an acknowledgement that in this hostile environment, you rely on each other as much as you rely on your tools. Trust is a currency down here, more valuable than the coal itself. You need to know that the guy next to you won't bolt at the first sign of danger, that he'll have your back when the earth itself seems to turn against you. But let's not get too misty-eyed. At the end of the day, survival is your primary goal. The romantic narratives of unity and strength are tempting, but they only tell part of the story. The other part is raw, unfiltered, and as hard-edged as the coal you extract. You're not just a miner. You're a survivor, navigating a complex web of economic forces, social dynamics, and personal challenges. As the afternoon light fades, replaced by the flickering glow of your lamp, you're reminded once more that down here, in the belly of the beast. It's not just about the coal. It's about the grit, the guts, and the indomitable spirit that keeps you going. The legends of the rugged miner may be romantic, but it's the reality of your daily struggle that truly defines you. But as the day finally begins to wind down and the last echoes of the pickaxe fade, it's time to surface, literally and metaphorically. As you clamber out of the pit, lungs aching for a proper lungful of air, you're stepping back into a world that's slowly coming to terms with the environmental and human cost of all this coal mining. It wasn't just your shoulders bearing the weight of the Industrial Revolution. The environment was taking a walloping too. The coal you've been mining doesn't vanish once it hits the surface. It burns with a vengeance, filling the skies with a smoky haze that makes a London fog look like a clear day in May. Back in the day, they didn't have the luxury of environmental impact assessments, and let's be honest, the air quality wasn't exactly a priority. The relentless appetite for coal left the earth scarred with pits and the rivers running black with waste. But here's where the gears start turning: public outcry. The Victorian society was beginning to notice that maybe, just maybe, turning the air into a soot smoothie wasn't the best idea. Reports started trickling out, like the 1863 Public Health Act, which aimed to tackle the smoke nuisance. It was a start, albeit a small one, like a single coal miner trying to move a mountain. And then there were the miners themselves, the human canaries in this coal mine of progress. The grim reports and first-hand accounts of their plight sparked outrage and eventually reform. By the mid-19th century, the winds of change were rustling through Parliament. The Mines Act of 1842 was a landmark moment, banning women and children under 10 from working underground, a small victory that was as overdue as a miner's payday. It was followed by the Coal Mines Regulation Act of 1872, which introduced the idea of mine inspectors, safety lamps, and wait for it, mandatory pit checks. Revolutionary. These reforms didn't happen overnight or without resistance. They were the result of tireless campaigning by reformers who saw that human lives shouldn't be as disposable as the tools they used. It was the beginning of a slow shift in mindset, acknowledging that workers' rights were, in fact, a thing. But let's not get too carried away with the triumph of human decency. Even with reforms, the life of a miner was still no picnic. The industry's decline, however, was inevitable. New energy sources were emerging, and coal, once the darling of the industrial age, was starting to lose its shine. The early 20th century saw a shift towards oil and electricity, and by the mid-1900s, coal was being cast aside like yesterday's news. Fast forward to today, and the legacy of those miners is more than just a chapter in a history book. They laid the groundwork, quite literally, for the modern world. The struggles they endured sparked conversations about human rights and industrial safety that still resonate. We've come a long way from the days of unregulated pits, but let's not pat ourselves on the back too quickly. There's still work to be done. The echoes of those early days of industrialization remind us that progress should never come at the cost of humanity or the planet. The story of coal mining isn't just about the soot-streaked faces and the clatter of pickaxes. It's a tale of resilience and reform, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be crushed under the weight of industry. So, as you stand on the brink of the 21st century, take a moment to remember those who went before, who clawed their way through darkness to light the way for progress. In the grand scheme of things, the miners might not have been the ones designing the steam engines or building the railways, but they were the ones making it all possible. They were the unsung heroes, the backbone of a revolution that changed the world. And maybe that's the real legacy, the understanding that progress is a shared journey, one that requires more than just technological advancement, but also a commitment to the people who make it all happen. It's a story as old as time and as new as tomorrow, reminding us that while we've come a long way, the journey is far from over. Ever wonder what it was like to be in the shoes, or should I say, the fur-lined boots, of a Viking shipbuilder in the 8th century? Picture yourself standing in the dense forests of Scandinavia, the air so crisp it could almost crack, and all around you, the whispers of ancient trees hold the secrets of a burgeoning empire. The Viking Age didn't spring up overnight. It was carved from the very essence of the landscape itself. Trust me, without these forests, you'd probably just be a really well-dressed farmer. Now let's talk wood. Not the kind you chop for your fireplace, but the kind that laid the foundation for an entire age of exploration and conquest. The Vikings were nothing if not resourceful. They had a knack for turning natural bounty into tools of might. Into the Scandinavian forests, a veritable treasure trove of timber, brimming with oak, ash, and pine. Oak, the sturdy backbone of any self-respecting longship, was prized for its durability. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of reinforced steel. Oak ensured your longship could withstand the North Sea's tantrums, which were as unpredictable as a moody Norse god. The economic implications of this shipbuilding frenzy were as vast as the fjords. If you think about it, the Viking economy was as heavily anchored in shipbuilding as a longship itself was anchored in the fjord. Crafting these vessels was no small feat. It required a community effort, a rudimentary assembly line of sorts. Even the most seasoned blacksmiths and carpenters couldn't do it alone. The cost? Well, let's just say a decent longship could set you back the equivalent of a small village annual grain supply. And you thought your car payments were steep. Geography was destiny for the Vikings, and the longship was the perfect match for Scandinavia's dramatic coastlines. The long, narrow, and shallow hulls of these ships weren't just for show. They were designed to navigate both the high seas and the shallow rivers, making them the Swiss Army knife of maritime engineering. These vessels could be beached practically anywhere, allowing Vikings to raid, trade, and explore with unparalleled efficiency. They could glide silently up a river, strike with the swiftness of a summer storm, and then vanish before anyone could even say, "Hey, where did the livestock go?" But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because before you could set sail, there was the little matter of actually building the thing. Alongside oak, ash was used for its flexibility, ideal for those sleek curved prows that slice through waves like hot knives through butter. Pine, lightweight yet strong, made for perfect masts and oars. You'd better believe a Viking longship was the ancient equivalent of a Rolls-Royce, minus the heated seats and cup holders. It's also worth noting that the Vikings weren't just mindless marauders with axes and a penchant for plunder. Shipbuilding was a sophisticated craft, requiring knowledge passed down through generations. Every plank was meticulously shaped and overlapped, a technique known as clinker building. This wasn't just for looks. It made the hulls incredibly strong and flexible, allowing them to flex with the waves instead of fighting them. It was a dance of wood and water, and the Vikings were its master choreographers. Of course, the romanticized image of the Viking longship is almost as enduring as the ships themselves. We love the idea of these bearded warriors setting sail on daring adventures, but let's be real. The reality was much grittier. It was hard, back-breaking work, and the smell of tar and sweat was as much a part of the process as the wood itself. A longship wasn't just a vessel. It was a lifeline, a passport to new lands, and a mobile fortress. Without them, the Viking age as we know it might never have set sail. In the end, the Viking longship was more than just a means to an end. It was a symbol, an extension of the Viking spirit of adventure and conquest, one built from the very land they called home. These ships were their wings, and with them, they didn't just navigate the seas, they navigated history. So next time you hear the call of the Norsemen echoing through time, remember it all started with a few trees, a lot of ingenuity, and the unyielding spirit of a people ready to carve their legacy into the world. Now, let's peel back the layers of myth and look at the real stars of this Norse nautical show, the people who actually rolled up their sleeves and built these legendary longships. The Viking longship wasn't just the product of a lone genius with a hammer and a penchant for the sea breeze. Instead, it was a full-on community project, the ancient equivalent of a barn raising, but with way more wood and a touch of maritime magic thrown in. If you were a Viking back then, you might have found yourself shoulder to shoulder with blacksmiths, carpenters, and even the Ard farmer, each playing their part in this shipbuilding symphony. The master shipwright was the conductor, of course, orchestrating the process with precision and expertise passed down like a treasured family saga. These guys didn't just slap together some planks and hope for the best. No, they were the real deal, and their work was both an art and a science. The tools of the trade were as essential as the hands that wielded them. Axes were the primary instrument here, but don't think of your average chopping tool. These were specialized shipbuilding axes, designed to shape and smooth the timber into the sleek, hydrodynamic forms that made the longships so iconic. And let's not forget about augers, those twisty little guys that helped drill holes for pegs and dowels, ensuring every piece of the ship was snug as a bug in a rug, or more accurately, tight enough to brave the North Sea's wrath. The transformation from tree to sea-ready vessel was no overnight miracle. No, crafting a longship was a marathon, not a sprint. It typically took months of labor, often stretching into the better part of a year. Imagine the patience required to turn towering oaks and resilient ash trees into a ship capable of carrying warriors, goods, and dreams across the waves. The economic implications of this communal crafting effort were massive. We're talking enough resources and manpower to make a modern construction project look like child's play. The village itself was an integral part of this endeavor. Picture it. Every able-bodied soul pitching in, from the youngest lad hauling wood to the elderly offering sage advice and steadying hands. The women, too, played a crucial role, whether it was weaving sails from wool, yes, those iconic striped sails, or managing the domestic front to keep the builders fed and focused. Their contribution was as vital as the timber itself, weaving the social fabric that held the whole operation together. Now, let's talk scale. We're not just crafting a dinghy here. A proper longship, like the ones that made the world tremble at the sight of those dragon-headed prows, could be upwards of 75 feet long. That's enough wood to build a small forest, or at least to denude one. And with such vast resources required, it's no wonder entire communities were needed. The economic weight was as hefty as the ship itself, a testament to the importance of these vessels in Viking society. But why put in all this effort? Surely, there were easier ways to get from point A to point B than carving a floating fortress out of a forest. Well, for the Vikings, it wasn't just about transportation. These ships were the keys to the kingdom, or kingdoms rather. They allowed access to trade routes, new lands, and yes, the occasional raid. Essentially, longships were the multi-tools of the Viking world, and their construction was a community's investment in its own future prosperity and power. There's a certain romance to the idea of a village coming together to build a ship, isn't there? This is the stuff of legends, right up there with heroic sagas and epic battles. Yet behind the romance lies the gritty reality of daily life, the sweat, the strain, the relentless pursuit of perfection. It's a reminder that the Viking Age wasn't all about conquest and glory. It was about hard work, collaboration, and a shared vision of what might lie beyond the horizon. So, as you imagine those bearded warriors setting sail with the wind in their hair and the promise of adventure ahead, remember the bustling hive of activity that brought their dreams to life. Each longship was a testament to human ingenuity, the craftsmanship of countless hands, and the indomitable spirit of a people who looked at the sea not as a barrier, but as a bridge to the world. And while the Vikings may have left their mark on history with their daring exploits and fearsome reputation, it's the quiet, steady work of those shipbuilders that truly set the course for their legendary voyages. Now, let's dive into the gritty underbelly of Viking economics, where the cost of a longship was the ancient equivalent of buying a private jet, minus the complimentary champagne. You see, crafting a longship wasn't just a matter of collecting a few trees and calling it a day. It was a full-blown financial ordeal that could leave your silver reserves as empty as a mead barrel at a Viking feast. First up, the cost of materials. Oak, ash, and pine didn't just grow on trees. Well, technically they did, but you get the drift. These timbers were precious commodities. The oak alone, with its Herculean strength, was worth its weight in silver. In fact, a single longship could require upwards of 20 large oak trees, not to mention the additional ash for the flexible parts and pine for masts. If you had to put a price tag on it, we're talking enough silver to make a dragon's hoard look like pocket change. But wait, there's more. It's not just about the wood. Let's throw in the iron nails, because a longship without nails is like a warrior without a sword. These weren't your run-of-the-mill nails either. They were hand-forged by blacksmiths whose skills were as sharp as their tools. Each longship required thousands of these little metal wonders, and with iron being a valuable resource, you could expect to pay through the nose, or rather the helmet, for them. Now, let's talk labor. Building a longship wasn't a one-man show. It was more of a community theater production with a cast of dozens. You've got your master shipwrights, blacksmiths, carpenters, and even the village gossip chipping in with unsolicited advice. Paying these skilled workers wasn't cheap. Labor costs could amount to several head of cattle, which was no small change in a society where livestock was as good as currency. Imagine paying your mortgage in cows, and you're starting to get the picture. And here's a fun twist. In some cases, the local chieftain might call in favors or command his free men to work without pay. Think of it as the original unpaid internship. This was a society where loyalty was key, and helping build a longship for your leader was as much about duty as it was about economics. But let's be real, it didn't hurt to have a little extra sway with the guy who controlled the longships, which were essentially the Viking version of a modern military fleet. Speaking of politics, here's where it gets really juicy. The construction of a longship wasn't just about crossing the sea, it was a power play. Owning a longship was like having a golden ticket to the world stage. It gave you the ability to raid, trade, and exert influence far beyond your fjord. For chieftains, it was about projecting power and prestige. Imagine being able to boast that you could raid the English coast before breakfast and be back in time for lunch. That's a flex if ever there was one. Longships were also a great equalizer. They allowed smaller clans to punch above their weight, so to speak. If you could muster the resources to build one, you could stake a claim in the wider Viking world. It wasn't just about wealth, it was about status and the ability to influence regional politics. The longship was your calling card, your symbol of ambition, and your ticket to the Norse version of the big leagues. Let's not forget the social ladder climbing aspect. For those who had the means to fund a longship, it was an investment in their legacy. These ships were often elaborately decorated, with intricately carved prows and painted sails that made a statement long before the crew set foot on enemy soil. It was like showing up to a party in a bespoke suit while everyone else is in off-the-rack tunics. So, what about the folks who weren't in the chieftain's inner circle? Well, they could still benefit from the longship economy. The demand for materials and labor created a bustling trade network. Craftsmen and traders found new opportunities, and local economies thrived on the back of these maritime marvels. It's a reminder that even in a society dominated by raiders and warriors, the humble hands of the craftsmen were the ones shaping the future. All this might sound like a romantic epic, but there's a harsh reality lurking beneath the surface. The pressure to build and maintain these vessels was immense. Imagine the stress of ensuring your longship was seaworthy when a single leak could spell disaster. And let's not forget the constant maintenance. Tar wasn't just for the road, you know. It was the Viking duct tape that kept ships watertight and ready for action. In the end, the Viking longship was more than just a boat. It was a symbol of power, ambition, and the relentless drive of a people determined to leave their mark on history. These vessels weren't just about getting from A to B. They were about transforming the very landscape of Europe. And as we continue to unravel the story of these iconic ships, let's keep in mind that every nail, every plank, and every ounce of sweat poured into their creation was a testament to the indomitable spirit of the Vikings. So, as we sail into the next chapter of our tale, remember, the sea may have been their playground, but it was the longship that gave them the keys to the kingdom. So, with the longship being the Vikings' golden ticket to fame and fortune, let's sail right into the choppy waters of myth and reality. Ah, the legendary dragon-headed ships, as fierce as they sound. Hollywood loves to parade them around like the ultimate Viking calling card, but let's take a hard look at those fearsome prows. First off, were Viking ships really sporting dragon heads? Well, yes and no. The truth isn't as straightforward as a Viking raid on a sunny English coast. Some ships did have carved figureheads, often depicting mythical creatures like dragons or serpents, but not every vessel was a floating fantasy novel. These fearsome figures were more about psychological warfare than decoration. Imagine gliding silently up to an enemy shore with a carved dragon glaring from the bow. It's enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. But here's where reality nudges in. These figureheads were removable. That's right. They weren't permanent fixtures. Vikings would attach them for raids to intimidate adversaries and remove them when entering friendly ports or sacred waters. It's like putting on your best suit for a job interview and then slipping back into comfy clothes for the ride home. The practicality of it all might not make for a blockbuster movie, but it sure was savvy. And speaking of savvy, let's talk design. The Viking longship was a marvel of engineering, but not because it looked like a mythical beast on water. Its genius lay in its functionality. Long, narrow, and with a shallow draft, these ships could navigate both ocean swells and shallow rivers. Think Swiss Army knife, but with sails and oars. They didn't have the luxury of GPS, but they had the next best thing, adaptability. Now, let's dive into some primary sources. The Garkstad ship, excavated from a burial mound in Norway in 1880, is a prime example of Viking craftsmanship. Dating back to around 890 AD, this 76-foot beauty was built for speed and stealth. Its clinker-built hull, overlapping planks for those of us who didn't major in shipbuilding, allowed it to flex with the waves, making it agile in rough seas. Forget about dragon heads for a second. The real magic was in the ship's ability to handle whatever Mother Nature threw at it. While we're myth-busting, let's address the sails. Hollywood often shows Vikings rowing their ships like it's an ancient cross-fit class. In reality, these vessels were primarily sail-powered, with oars used for maneuvering in calm waters or close quarters. The sails were typically made of wool, and yes, they were often striped, but they were more about function than fashion. Imagine the labor involved in weaving a sail big enough to catch the wind for a 75-foot longship. It's enough to make you appreciate the power of a good tailwind. Now, let's talk about the lore that wraps these ships in a cloak of mystery. Vikings were the rock stars of their day, and like any good legend, their story has been told and retold, each time with a little more glitter. The tales of dragon-headed ships are compelling, and who doesn't love a good dragon? But as enticing as these stories are, they overshadow the real brilliance of Viking engineering and strategy. The allure of the Viking longship saga is easy to see. It's a blend of adventure, danger, and a touch of the fantastical. But the reality is more grounded. These ships weren't just about looking menacing. They were about survival and success on the high seas. They were a testament to the Vikings' understanding of their environment and their ability to exploit it to the fullest. The fact that their legend has outlived their empire is a nod to their impact on history. And let's not ignore how these myths shape our current understanding of Vikings. The image of a horned warrior aboard a dragon-headed ship is iconic, but it's more marketing than fact. Horned helmets, not a thing. They'd have been more of a liability in battle than an advantage. Yet somehow, these images have stuck, partly because they capture our imagination. The real Viking story is fascinating enough without embellishment, but the myths give us a lens through which we can explore the past. In the end, the Viking longship is a symbol of the Norse spirit, wild, adventurous, and a little misunderstood. As we continue to explore their history, let's remember that the allure of the myth doesn't diminish the reality. It enhances it, drawing us in to discover the truths behind the legends. And as we sail into the next chapter of this Viking saga, keep an eye on those dragon heads. They may not be as ubiquitous as Hollywood would have us believe, but they sure make for a good story. So, where does that leave us with the Viking longship? Far beyond the realm of horned helmets and dragon-headed prow fantasies, that's for sure. These vessels are nothing less than the unsung heroes of our historical narrative, the real stars of the Viking Age. They were a blend of engineering genius, community effort, and good, old-fashioned Norse tenacity. Without them, the Vikings might have been stuck playing house in their fjords, rather than spreading their influence across Europe like butter on a warm slice of rye. But let's take a step back and look at the big picture, the legacy of these magnificent ships. Viking longships didn't just change the course of history. They carved new paths on the geopolitical map. These were the vehicles of choice for raids that left English monasteries quaking in their cassocks, and for trade missions that brought Scandinavian goods to Mediterranean shores. The Vikings were able to establish trade routes that stretched from the icy realms of the North Atlantic to the bustling bazaars of Constantinople, all thanks to these versatile vessels. Now, here's a hot take. Viking longships were the original disruptors. Long before Silicon Valley made it cool, they turned the seas into highways and the rivers into express lanes, making Europe far more interconnected than it had been since the Roman Empire decided to take a siesta. And while the Romans were all about straight roads and aqueducts, the Vikings went with the flow, literally, navigating rivers and coastlines with an ease that made them the envy of their contemporaries. The impact wasn't just economic or political, it was cultural. The very word Viking has become synonymous with exploration and adventure. These ships carried not just warriors, but also settlers who established communities far from their icy homelands. Places like Dublin, York, and Normandy owe a tip of the helmet to Norse settlers who arrived by longship, ready to trade, raid, or simply stay for the long haul. And let's not forget the personal touch. The Vikings' penchant for storytelling was carried across the waves too, with sagas and legends spreading as far and wide as their ships could sail. In terms of naval architecture, Viking longships were the equivalent of that sleek, modern sports car parked next to a clunky, old station wagon. Their clinker-built designs influenced shipbuilding for centuries, contributing to the development of vessels that were both durable and swift. This wasn't just some Norse secret sauce. It was a full-on recipe that other cultures would borrow and tweak for their own maritime adventures. The English, the Normans, and even the Byzantines got in on the act, adapting the clinker technique to suit their own needs. Now, let's talk about those iconic prows one last time. While every saga-teller and Hollywood director loves to toss in a fearsome dragon head, the true beauty of those ships was in their function, not their fierce facade. They were built to last, to endure rough seas and unpredictable weather, and last they did. The Garkstad and Oseberg ships, for instance, weren't just buried with their chieftains for show. They were entombed because they represented the zenith of Viking craftsmanship, worth taking into the afterlife. The economic implications, monumental. The longship economy wasn't just about building ships. It was about building a society. The demand for ships spurred a mini-industrial revolution of sorts in Scandinavia, creating jobs for craftsmen, traders, and even those pesky unpaid interns, the free men who worked for the chieftains. It was a labor force that stretched from the forest to the forge, each step of the process an integral part of the Viking economic engine. And what about the myths? They endure because they enchant. The image of a Viking longship slicing through misty waters with a dragon's gaze, fixed forward, captivates us because it speaks to something primal. Our love of adventure, the thrill of the unknown, and the desire to leave a mark on the world. But peel back the layers of myth, and what you find is a story of grit, ingenuity, and human spirit. The real charm of these ships lies not in their fantastical elements, but in the very real sweat and skill that brought them to life. As we wrap up this tale of timber and tar, let's remember that the Viking longship was more than just a means to an end. It was a vessel of dreams, daring, and destiny. It was a tool that allowed a people to transcend their icy confines and influence an entire continent. The legacy of the longship is a reminder that the simplest tools, when wielded with wisdom and courage, can change the world. So, next time you see a depiction of a Viking ship, whether it's in a museum or a movie, give a nod to the real heroes, the master craftsmen and fearless sailors who ventured beyond the horizon and into the annals of history.